Kilt Trip by Riley Fox. Copyright 2026 by Riley Fox. All rights reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced in any form or by any electronic or mechanical means, including information storage and retrieval systems, without written permission from the author, except for the use of brief quotations in a book review. This audiobook is narrated using an AI-generated voice. Chapter 1. The call from my gran came on a Tuesday. I was mid-swirl, my nose deep in a glass holding a 25-year-old Macallan that smelled like God's own cigar box, all leather and dried fruit and a whisper of smoke. It was the kind of scent that told a story, a slow, patient epic in a bottle. My story. The one I was written for myself, far from the damp hills and the cloying smell of fermenting barley. Then my phone buzzed against the polished oak of the bar, a rude electronic intrusion. I ignored it. It buzzed again. With a sigh, I set the glass down. The caller ID was a name I hadn't seen in months. Gran. I swiped to answer, putting it on speaker. Gran, is everything all right? Her voice crackled through the tiny speaker, a flaw in a crystal glass. Ewan, pet, I need you home. Home. The word landed in my gut like a dram of cheap peat bog whiskey, all burn and no warmth. It tasted of ash and rain and 10 years of deliberate absence. Glen Cailleach wasn't home anymore. It was a memory I'd curated, polished, and shelved like a rare single malt, to be admired from a distance, but never ever opened. My throat tightened. Home? Gran, I'm in the middle of a tasting. The distillery, Ewan. The fragility in her voice vanished, replaced by a brittle edge that cut right through my excuses. Auld Brose is failing. The air left my lungs in a rush. I gripped the edge of the bar, my knuckles white. Not the distillery. Auld Brose wasn't just a collection of copper stills and stone buildings. It was my gran's pulse. It was the whole town's pulse. The thought of it failing was like imagining her heart could just stop. I'll be there tomorrow, I said, the words tasting foreign. The drive north is a slow-motion shedding of skin. I trade my bespoke charcoal suit for dark-washed denim and a cashmere jumper that feels too soft for the journey. My polished leather shoes, scuffed by nothing more than Glasgow's manicured pavements, swapped for boots I haven't worn since I was a teenager. The final piece of the costume is a waterproof jacket. It feels alien, a hollow shell of a person I no longer am. The city shrinks in my rearview mirror, its sharp modern angles dissolving into the soft, ancient curves of the Highlands. The motorway gives way to A-roads, then to single-track lanes, flanked by dry stone walls and stubborn, wind-blasted sheep. The sky turns from a hazy city gray to a vast, dramatic canvas of bruised purples and deep blues. It starts to rain. Of course it does. Glen Cailleach greets me not with a welcome, but with a thick, clinging mist that smells of wet earth and memory. I park my car, a sleek silver thing that looks offensively out of place, on the damp gravel in front of the distillery. Auld Brose. My heart gives a painful thud against my ribs. I've held a perfect image of it in my mind for a decade, the proud, twin pagoda roofs breathing gentle smoke into the sky, the steadfast granite walls, the name painted in smart, confident lettering above the door. The reality is a punch to the stomach. The paint is peeling. A few slates are missing from the roof of the bonded warehouse, leaving a gaping wound. The whole place looks tired, slumped, as if the very stones are sighing with exhaustion. A lump forms in my throat, thick and hard to swallow. The familiar malty scent of the mash tun hangs in the air, but it's soured by something else. Desperation, maybe. Then I see him. He's standing by the entrance to the stillhouse, all broad shoulders and stubbornness, built like one of the Highland cows that graze the surrounding hills. His hair, the color of autumn bracken, is a mess, and there's a smudge of soot high on his cheekbone. 10 years. 10 years and he hasn't changed at all. Still rooted to this place like a gnarled old oak. Jamie MacLeod. My stomach plummets. Of all the ghosts I expected to face, His is the one I wanted to avoid the most. The last time I saw him, I was 17. My bags were packed, and his face was a mask of betrayal. We had said things, unforgivable things. He turns, and his gaze lands on me. His eyes, the color of a stormy loch, narrow. The friendly, open face I remember from childhood is gone, replaced by a hard, unwelcoming scowl. He wipes a hand on his trousers, leaving a dark smear. Fox. He says my surname like it's an insult. What are you doing here? The air crackles. The old animosity is right there, fresh as if the last decade never happened. I shove my hands in my pockets, my city-soft skin suddenly feeling thin. My Gran called. She said, "He's here to save us." Gran's voice, bright and determined, cuts through the tension. She appears in the doorway of the visitor center, looking as fragile as a thistlehead, her white hair a soft halo around her face. But her eyes are sharp, darting between me and Jamie with a terrifyingly cheerful glint. She claps her small, wrinkled hands together. Jamie's scowl deepens. "Save us? Jean, what are you talking about?" "The Speyside Festival, of course," she declares, marching towards us, her wellies squelching on the wet ground. "The judges are coming. They don't just want a good dram anymore. They want a story, a romance, something to capture the imagination." I have a sudden, nauseating premonition, a wave of dread so powerful it almost sends me stumbling back towards my car. This is not about failing equipment or a bad batch. This is something else entirely, something worse. "And I've found one," Gran barrels on, her smile widening. She gestures first to Jamie, then to me, as if presenting two prize bulls at the market. Our brilliant, hard-working master distiller who's kept this place running on sheer grit. Jamie crosses his arms over his chest, his expression turning to stone. "And my darling grandson," she finishes, beaming at me. "The famous city sommelier, home from Glasgow to lend his sophisticated palate to the family business. I know what's coming. I can see the terrible, insane shape of it forming in the misty air between us. The two of you," she says, her voice ringing with triumph. "Joining forces to bring Auld Brose into the future, a perfect blend of tradition and modernity." She pauses, taking a deep, dramatic breath before delivering the final catastrophic blow. "As a couple." I choke, not on air, not on spit, but on the sheer, unadulterated absurdity of the words. A strangled, gasping noise escapes my throat. The world tilts, the purple hills spinning around me. For a second I think the 25-year-old MacLeod has decided to stage a violent revolt in my bloodstream. Beside me, Jamie doesn't move, not a muscle. He just stares at my Gran, his face a granite mask of disbelief. When he finally speaks, his voice is low and flat, each word a block of ice. "Absolutely not." My heart is hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I look from Jamie's thunderous expression to my Gran's unwavering, utterly convinced smile, and I realize I haven't just come home. I've walked straight into a trap. Chapter 2. The words left my mouth and hung in the damp air, solid as stones. Absolutely not. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the scuff of a pigeon's claws on the slate roof above us. Morag, my Gran, didn't so much as blink. Her smile stayed pinned to her face, a piece of delicate, terrifying machinery. Beside me, Ewan Fox looked like he'd been tasered. His mouth was slightly open, his sharp city boy features frozen in a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Good. At least we agreed on something. My own heart was a heavy, frantic drum against my ribs. This was meant to be a conversation about a loan, about suppliers, about the impossible price of barley. Not this. Not a pantomime romance with the last person on earth I'd ever want to share a dram with, let alone a fake relationship. "Jamie, darling," Morag said, her voice still infuriatingly sweet, like honey laced with arsenic. "Don't be difficult." Difficult? The word came out like a bark. I took a step toward her, my boots crunching on the gravel. I could feel the heat rising up my neck, a familiar burn. "You want me to lie to the Speyside judges? You want me to pretend to be with him?" I jabbed a thumb toward Ewan, not even bothering to look at him. I could feel his presence like a change in air pressure. He smelled of sandalwood and money, an invasive scent in my world of peat and fermenting wash. "It's not a lie, it's a story," she corrected, waving a dismissive hand. "It's marketing. The industry is all about narrative now. Provenance, heritage, romance. The judges from the festival committee, they're coming in 2 weeks. They don't just want good whiskey, they want a fairy tale to go with it." I stared at her, my gran, the woman who taught me how to read a hydrometer and spot the precise moment the low wines were ready, the woman whose motto had always been, "The whiskey speaks for itself." "You're not serious," I said. The words scraped raw from my throat. Auld Brose has stood for over 150 years on the strength of what's in the bottle, not on some made-up sentimental pish. "And where has that gotten us, Jamie?" Her voice lost its sweetness, replaced by the hard edge of worry I knew all too well. It was the voice she used when the bank manager called. "We're 3 months from telling the whole town we're closing the doors for good. We're one bad batch away from ruin." The air went thin. My stomach twisted into a knot of cold dread. I knew things were bad. I lived it every day. I saw the peeling paint on the warehouse doors, felt the worn-out gears on the grist mill shuddering with every turn. I was the one juggling suppliers, begging for another 30 days on an invoice for oak casks. But hearing her say it out loud, in front of him, it was like being stripped naked in the middle of the high street. My gaze flicked to Ewan. He'd recovered from his initial shock and was now watching us, his expression unreadable. One of his perfectly sculpted eyebrows was corked up, a dark slash against his pale skin. He looked like a critic watching a particularly bad play, detached and ready to write a scathing review. "This is insane," Ewan finally said, his voice smooth and controlled, the Glasgow accent clipped and polished. "Morag, with all due respect, you can't possibly think this would work." "Why not?" she shot back, turning her formidable focus on him. "You're my grandson. You're a famous sommelier. You grew up here. Jamie is our master distiller. He's the heart of this place. The prodigal son returns from the city, reconnects with his childhood friend, and they fall in love saving the family business. It's perfect." I made a noise somewhere between a choke and a laugh. Childhood friend. We hadn't been friends since we were 15, and I'd realized his grand plans for the future involved getting as far away from Glen Cailleach as his legs would carry him. My plans had involved staying. That was the difference between us. It was a canyon that had only gotten wider over the last decade. "He thinks it's a joke," I said to Morag, gesturing at Ewan's wry smirk. "Because it is a joke. It's an insult to me and to every single person who has poured their life into this place." "It's not a joke," Ewan said, his eyes meeting mine for the first time. They were the color of a good Speyside single malt, but cold. "It's professional suicide is what it is, for both of us." "Oh, for heaven's sake," Morag snapped, her patience finally fraying. She looked from my face to Ewan's, her own expression hardening. "Do you think I want to do this? Do you think I enjoyed begging? I'm trying to save our home, our legacy." She looked directly at me then, her blue eyes, usually so bright, swimming with a terrifying fragility. "Your grandfather built this place with his bare hands. I am not going to be the one who lets it die." Something inside my chest cracked. All the anger, the hot, righteous fury, suddenly felt like steam dissolving in the cold Highland air. All that was left was the heavy, familiar weight of responsibility. I looked past her at the distillery, at the old pagoda roof stained black by a century of angel's share, at the stone walls I had helped repoint myself last spring. This place wasn't just a job, it was my bones. It was the reason I got up in the darkness of a winter morning, and the reason I couldn't sleep at night. She knew that, and she was using it against me. It was a low blow. It was brilliant. I dragged a hand over my face, the rough stubble scratching my palm. I smelled the faint trace of copper from the still I'd been polishing not an hour ago. A real smell, a real job. "And what does he get out of it?" I asked, my voice low. I couldn't bring myself to say his name. "He doesn't care about this place." "I'm here, aren't I?" Ewan cut in, a defensive edge to his tone. He straightened his ridiculously expensive jacket. It was dark gray, probably cashmere, and looked completely out of place against the backdrop of rust and stone. "You called, Morag. I came." Seizing the point. He gets to be the hero. Ewan Fox, the celebrated drinks expert who swooped in and saved the historic Auld Brose distillery. Think of the press, Ewan. It would be a hell of a story for you too. He was quiet for a moment, his clever eyes calculating. I could practically see the gears turning in his head, weighing the pros and cons, the potential humiliation against the potential publicity. He was a creature of the city, all angles and ambition. He'd run from this place, from the mud and the quiet and the obligation. He'd shed Glen Cailleach like a snake sheds its skin, and now he stood here wearing a new one made of tailored wool and self-importance. And my gran was asking me to pretend I loved him. The nausea was back, thick and sour at the back of my throat. It felt like swallowing a lie. Fine, I said, the word tasting like ash. Both of them stared at me. Ewan's jaw actually dropped this time. Morag's face flooded with relief. Oh, Jamie, I knew you'd... No, I cut her off. I held up a hand. My whole body was trembling, a low-grade tremor of fury and defeat. I fixed my eyes on Ewan, on his clean, soft hands and his shining, impractical shoes. Fine, I'll do it. I'll play along with this story. I spat the word out. But there are conditions. Ewan's expression shifted from shock to suspicion. Conditions? If you're gonna be my partner, I said, letting the word hang there, heavy and absurd, then you're gonna be my partner. You don't just swan in for a photo op with the judges and then piss off back to Glasgow. You stay, you work, here. I swept my arm out to encompass the whole, sprawling, struggling heart of the distillery. You'll learn what it is we're trying to save. You'll get your hands dirty. You'll shift barley. You'll clean the mash tun. You'll do whatever I tell you to do whenever I tell you to do it. I watched his face, looking for the revulsion, for the quick, easy no that would get me out of this. I was giving him an escape route. Take it, I begged him silently. Tell me to get stuffed. Walk away. He looked from my face to the distillery, then back again. A long, silent moment passed. The wind picked up, rattling the tin roof of the filling store. He ran a hand through his perfect hair, messing it up for the first time. Fine, he said, his voice tight. My stomach dropped to my boots. But I have a condition too, he added, his honey-colored eyes narrowing. You'll teach me. Everything, the distillation, the maturation, the blending. If I'm going to sell this story, I need to know what the hell I'm talking about. I'm not going to be your glorified farmhand. I held his gaze, a challenge, a negotiation. This wasn't about a fake romance anymore. This was about something else entirely. It was a battle for the soul of Auld Brose, and we'd just drawn the lines right down the middle of the courtyard. Deal, I gritted out.
Chapter 3. The call from my gran came on a Tuesday, smelling of panic and peat smoke right through the phone. I was mid-swirl, my wrist executing a perfect, languid circle. The whiskey, a 25-year-old single cask from a distillery so exclusive it barely had a sign, clung to the crystal glass like liquid amber. Notes of antique leather, Christmas cake, a whisper of brine. I lifted it to my nose, inhaling a scent that cost more per measure than my first car. Around me, the low murmur of Glasgow's elite filled the private tasting room, a symphony of quiet money and clinking Glencairns. This was my stage, my sanctuary. My phone buzzed against the polished oak table, a jarring, vulgar intrusion. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again, and again. With a sigh that was pure theater, I set the glass down and glanced at the screen. Gran Elsie. A knot of something cold and heavy formed in my stomach. Gran never called unless the sky was falling. I excused myself with a tight smile, slipping through a velvet curtain into a quiet hallway. Gran, is everything okay? Ewan, pet. Her voice was thin, stretched taut over a crackle of static and distance. Oh, Ewan, I need you. The cold knot in my gut tightened into a fist. What is it? Are you hurt? No, not me. It's the distillery, son. It's Auld Brose. A choked sob caught in her throat, a sound so raw it felt like a physical blow. We're in trouble. Real trouble. I need you to come home. Home. The word hung in the air between us, tasting of rain and rust and 10 years of deliberate absence. Glen Cailleach wasn't home anymore. It was a shoebox of memories I kept tucked away in the back of a cupboard, a place I'd fled with the single-minded desperation of a fox escaping a trap. Gran, what kind of trouble? I lowered my voice, my back pressed against the cool, flock-papered wall. I'm in the middle of a major tasting event. Can't this wait until the weekend? There won't be a weekend, Ewan. The bank, they're talking about foreclosure. Another sob, this one wetter. Please, just come home. The line went dead. I stood there for a long moment, the silence of the hallway amplifying the frantic thumping in my chest. Foreclosure. The words didn't compute. Auld Brose wasn't just a business. It was the town's beating heart, the family's soul, my great-grandfather's legacy, built from stone and stubbornness. It was meant to be eternal, as fixed in the landscape as the mountains themselves. My carefully constructed world, the one of bespoke suits and rare spirits, suddenly felt impossibly fragile. A house of cards, built on a lie that I could outrun my own history. Duty, sour and unwelcome, flooded my throat. I pushed back through the curtain, grabbed my coat, and muttered an apology to the host about a family emergency. The drive north was a blur of contracting worlds. Glasgow's neat grid of streetlights and sandstone bled into the sprawling, chaotic dark of the countryside. My Audi, usually so at home on sleek city tarmac, felt like an alien spacecraft on the winding A82. The further I drove, the more the road narrowed, the mountains looming up on either side like grim, silent judges. Each mile stripped away another layer of my city armor. Ewan the sommelier, with his sharp suits and even sharper opinions, was dissolving. In his place, a ghost was reforming. Ewan the boy, Ewan the runaway. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel, my knuckles white. Guilt was an acidic burn at the back of my throat. I'd spent a decade convincing myself that leaving was an act of ambition, of self-preservation. Now, it just felt like abandonment. 2 hours later, I turned onto the familiar potholed track that led to the distillery. The car's headlights swept across the main building, and my heart sank. It looked worse than I could have imagined. It looked like a shipwreck. The proud, white-painted name, Auld Brose Distillery, was flaking away, the letters weeping dark streaks down the stone wall. Weeds choked the gravel courtyard. A window on the second floor was boarded up with a piece of raw plywood. The place didn't just look like it was failing, it looked like it had already given up. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the rush of the nearby burn. And then, another sound. The rhythmic clang of metal on metal. A figure emerged from the shadows of the stillhouse, silhouetted against the single stark security light. He was broad, solid as a standing stone, and moved with a heavy, deliberate gait. He carried a massive wrench in one hand, like it was an extension of his arm. As he stepped into the light, my breath caught. Of course, it had to be him. Jamie MacLeod. He looked exactly the same, only more so. More rugged, more intimidating. His hair, the color of autumn bracken, was a shaggy mess, and a dark smudge of what looked like soot was smeared across one high cheekbone. He'd filled out since we were 17, the lanky strength of his youth settling into the dense, powerful build of a man who worked with his hands. He stopped dead when he saw me, his expression hardening. His gaze raked over me, from my probably too expensive jacket down to my city shoes, which were already accumulating a fine layer of Highland mud. A muscle jumped in his jaw. Fox, he grunted. The old name, the one he'd used to needle me, to mark me as other. The clever, skinny kid who was always too quick with his mouth. "What are you doing here?" The dismissal in his tone was instant, a bucket of ice water down my spine. The flicker of guilt I'd been nursing all the way up the A82 ignited into pure, hot annoyance. I got out of the car, slamming the door with more force than necessary. "My grandmother called me, MacLeod." I straightened my jacket, trying to reclaim some semblance of the authority I commanded in my own world. "She said there was a problem." He gave a short, humorless laugh that was more of a bark. "A problem? Aye, you can say that. The place is falling apart, and the bank's breathing down our necks. Not really your kind of problem, is it? Not enough artisanal cheese and tasting notes for you here?" My jaw tightened. I'm still a fox,
This distillery is still my family's. Is it? He took a step closer, the wrench swinging lightly at his side. He smelled of yeast, metal, and damp earth. The smell of this place. Funny, I haven't seen you in 10 years. You didn't seem to think it was your family's then. He was right, and that made me hate him even more. Before I could formulate a retort sharp enough to wound, the small wooden door to the cottage office creaked open. A tiny figure stood framed in the doorway, my grandmother. Elsie Fox was barely 5 feet tall, with a cloud of white hair and eyes as bright and blue as a summer sky. She looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile, like a piece of old porcelain. She clapped her hands together, a sharp, sudden sound that echoed in the quiet courtyard. Her face, however, wasn't etched with the worry I'd heard in her voice. It was alight with a terrifying, manic glee. "Wonderful! You're both here," she chirped, beaming at us as if we were two long-lost friends and not two men a breath away from reverting to a teenage feud. Just wonderful. Jamie and I exchanged a wary, confused glance. She scurried towards us, her small boots crunching on the gravel. "I've had the most brilliant idea. An absolute stroke of genius. It will solve everything." She grabbed my hand in one of hers, and to my astonishment, Jamie's in the other, pulling us closer together under the single buzzing light. Her grip was like iron. "The Speyside Festival judges," she announced, her voice ringing with triumph. "They're looking for a story this year, something with heart, something to capture the public's imagination." I stared at her blankly. "Gran, what are you talking about?" She ignored me, her gaze sweeping between me and Jamie, who looked as thunderstruck as I felt. "They don't just want a good whiskey, they want a romance. And I found one." She squeezed our hands, her blue eyes glittering with a madness I'd never seen before. "Our brilliant, hard-working master distiller," she declared, nodding at Jamie, "and my grandson, the famous city sommelier, returning to his roots." She paused for dramatic effect, her smile widening into a horrifying grin, "joining forces to bring Auld Brose into the future." Chapter 4. The words hung in the air of Elsie's office, thick and suffocating as a cloud of peat smoke. As a couple. My brain, which a moment ago had been calculating fermentation times and cask rotations, just stopped. It was like a stuck mash, all the moving parts seized at once, gummed up by a single, impossible idea. I stared at Elsie, at the terrifying, hopeful glint in her eyes. I stared at the man beside me, his ridiculously expensive jacket looking even more out of place now that it was part of a romantic farce. Fox. Ewan Fox. He was a ghost I'd managed to lay to rest years ago, and now here he was, not only haunting my distillery but being offered up as my pretend boyfriend. A laugh threatened to bubble up my throat, a wild, hysterical thing. I swallowed it down. It tasted like bile. "No," I said. The word was flat, final. I pulled my hand from Elsie's grasp as if her skin had turned to hot iron. "Jamie, pet, just listen." "No." This time it came out louder, a crack of thunder in the small, cluttered room. I turned to Ewan, expecting to see the same horror mirrored on his face. He was the city boy, the one who'd run from this place as fast as his legs could carry him. Surely he wanted this even less than I did. "Tell her," I said, jabbing a finger in his direction. "Tell her she's gone mad." Ewan just stood there, looking like he'd been slapped with a wet fish. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. That sharp, cutting wit he'd always used as a weapon had apparently been left behind in Glasgow. Good. For a second, just a split second, I felt a grim sort of satisfaction in seeing him speechless. "He doesn't need to tell me anything," Elsie chirped, her grip on Ewan's hand tightening. She was beaming, actually beaming, as if she'd just unveiled a 50-year-old single malt instead of a plan forged in utter desperation. "The Speyside Festival judges want a story. They're tired of old men in tweed talking about water sources. They want passion. They want a narrative." "So you're going to lie to them?" My voice was rough, scraping my throat on the way out. My heart hammered against my ribs like a cooper hammering a cask hoop into place. "You're going to turn Auld Brose into a pantomime?" "I'm going to save it," she said, and her smile didn't waver but her gaze hardened. "This isn't just about us, Jamie. It's about the whole Glen. It's about the men in the warehouse and the lasses in the bottling hall. It's about this place still being here in another 100 years. The air went out of my lungs. She was playing dirty and she knew it. She was using the distillery, my love for it, against me. I'd poured everything into this place since my dad died. I'd patched leaky pipes with my own money, worked 16-hour days until my back screamed, missed weddings and birthdays in my own life, all to keep the copper stills warm. He'd sent a bloody wreath. I looked at him again, really looked at him. The perfectly styled hair, the cashmere jumper that probably cost more than our weekly barley order, the faint, self-satisfied smirk that was just starting to reform on his face. He hadn't set foot in this distillery in a decade. He didn't know the names of the men who worked here. He didn't know the sound the washback made when it was full, or the sweet malty smell that meant everything was going right. He was a stranger, an outsider. "This is a joke," I said, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. "He knows nothing about making whiskey." "I know about selling it," Ewan said, finally finding his tongue. His voice was smoother than our best 12-year-old, and I hated it. "I know about branding, about story. Your gran is right. The market wants a narrative." "The market can go hang," I growled. "We make good whiskey. That should be enough." "It hasn't been enough for a long time, Jamie. You know that." She was right. I did know that. I knew it every time I signed a paycheck and prayed it wouldn't bounce. I knew it every time I saw another craft gin brand with a clever label taking up shelf space where our bottles used to be. The knowledge sat in my gut like a stone, a constant, heavy weight. "So this is your plan?" I asked, the fury rising again, hot and sharp. "You bring back the prodigal grandson who couldn't wait to leave, and you invent a romance between me and him?" The absurdity of it hit me again. "Elsie, we can't stand each other." "Perfect," she clapped her hands. "Passion, fire, the city boy and the country lad, finding common ground. It's a love story for the ages." "It's a bloody lie. It's marketing." Ewan cut in, stepping forward. He smelled of sandalwood and something else. "Money. Think of it as an accelerated narrative. We just give the festival judges what they're looking for. The prodigal grandson returns to his roots, falls for the rugged, brilliant master distiller who's been keeping the flame alive. They join forces. Tradition meets modernity. It's poetic." My stomach churned. Rugged? He made me sound like a piece of scenery, a prop in his grand narrative. "Absolutely not," I said, turning my back on both of them. I stared out the window at the familiar slope of Glen Cailleach, the heather just starting to turn purple. This was my home. This was real. What they were talking about was a fiction, a cheap trick. I won't do it. I'd rather we shut the doors for good than turn this place into a circus. The silence that followed was heavier than a waterlogged oak stave. I expected Elsie to argue, to cajole, to try another angle. Instead, her voice, when it came, was small and brittle. "We might have to." I turned around slowly. The manic energy had drained from her face, leaving her looking every one of her 78 years. Her hand, trembling where it rested on her desk. "What are you talking about?" "The bank," she said, her gaze dropping to a crisp white envelope on her blotter. "Mr. Henderson called this morning. He was very clear." She took a shaky breath. "If we don't show a significant uptick in interest, a new investor, a major distribution deal, something to convince them we're viable, before the festival, they're calling in the loan." The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. The loan. It was a massive figure, a number I tried not to think about, the monster that lived under the distillery's bed. "They can't," I whispered. "The festival is our chance to—" "Our chance to what, Jamie?" she asked, her voice cracking. "To win an award we can't afford to advertise? To sell a few more cases when we need to sell a whole container ship? This isn't a game. This is our last, best hope. It's a Hail Mary." The fight drained out of me, replaced by a cold, creeping dread that coiled in my stomach. The anger, the pride, the indignation, it all felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. All my hard work, all the sweat and sacrifice, it wasn't enough. I had failed. I hadn't been able to save it on my own. My gaze drifted from Elsie's pale, worried face to Ewan. He was watching me, his usual smirk gone, his honey-colored eyes unreadable. He wasn't the ghost of drams past anymore. He wasn't the entitled city boy. He was the Hail Mary, and I was the one who was going to have to catch him.
Chapter 5. My grandmother's gatehouse was exactly as I remembered it. 1 part charming, 2 parts cramped, and currently, it seemed, equipped with only one functioning bed.
Dinner had been a masterclass in silent warfare. We passed the potatoes and gravy like grenades with the pins pulled. Jamie's jaw was a knot of granite. My own smile felt brittle enough to shatter. Through it all, Gran just beamed, a tiny, placid Buddha presiding over a Cold War summit before insisting I stay on site. "You need to get the feel of the place again, pet," she'd said, patting my hand with fingers as frail and strong as old ivy. "I've had the gatehouse done up just for you." She deposited me at the door with a quick bird-like kiss on the cheek and vanished into the gloaming before I could get a word in. Before I could discover that her definition of done up was at best aspirational. The main room was fine, a bit like a forgotten museum exhibit titled Rural Scottish Living, circa 1998. The air was thick with the scent of pine cleaner and damp stone. A lumpy sofa faced a small dark fireplace, and a threadbare tartan rug did its best to hide the scuffed floorboards. It was fine. I could survive this. My life in Glasgow was a meticulously curated gallery of minimalism and clean lines. This was just a field trip into chaos. I dropped my overnight bag by the door and went to inspect my sleeping quarters. Gran had mentioned 2 bedrooms. I opened the door to the first, just off the main room. And there it was, a sturdy-looking double bed, neatly made with a thick, cream-colored duvet. A wave of relief washed over me so profound my knees felt weak. Thank God, a decent bed, a door I could close, a space to decompress from the constant, low-grade hum of Jamie MacLeod's disapproval. Curious about the rest of the renovation, I crossed the small hall to the other room. I turned the old brass knob and pushed the door open. The smell of turpentine hit me first, sharp and chemical. The room wasn't a bedroom. It was a storage closet for a half-finished DIY project. Stacks of paint cans lined one wall, their labels promising shades like Hebridean Mist and Thistle Purple. Drop cloths, stiff with old paint, were heaped in a corner. A stepladder stood in the middle of the floor like a skeletal sentinel. There was no bed. There was barely room to stand. My throat tightened, manipulated. The word echoed in the empty, chemical-smelling space. I was being managed, steered, penned in like one of the local sheep. I backed out, closing the door on the lie, and a fresh spike of anger, hot and sharp, pierced through my exhaustion. I stalked back into the main room, my hands clenching and unclenching at my sides. Fine, 1 bed. It was infuriating, but it was my bed. I'd shower, fall into it, and in the morning I would have a very calm, very direct conversation with my grandmother about personal space and blatant falsehoods. A sharp rap on the front door made me jump. For a second, I thought it was Gran, returning with some forgotten item or another piece of her grand, maddening plan. I pulled the door open, a weary complaint already forming on my lips. It died there. Jamie MacLeod stood on the stone step, a worn canvas duffel bag slung over one broad shoulder. Rain clung to his dark, bracken-colored hair, and his expression was thunderous. He looked from me to the room behind me, and the glower he'd been wearing all evening intensified into something genuinely menacing. A stone dropped into the pit of my stomach. My fingers tightened on the doorknob. Not him. Anyone but him. "Fox," he grunted. It wasn't a greeting. It was an accusation. "MacLeod," I said, my voice dangerously even. "Lost?" His gaze was flinty. "What are you doing here?" "My grandmother invited me," I said, making a vague gesture to the room. "She's had the place done up." I couldn't stop the sarcastic air quotes. "Apparently, I'm staying here for the duration." A muscle jumped in his jaw. He looked past me again, his eyes scanning the cramped space, and a horrifying sort of comprehension dawned on his face. He looked like a man who'd just been told his prize-winning bull had been entered into a 3-legged race, with me. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, more to the damp night air than to me. "I assure you I'm not in a joking mood. What do you want?" He finally met my eyes, and the sheer, unadulterated fury in them was startling. "What do I want? I want my own bloody rooms, the ones I've lived in for 10 years. He hitched his duffel bag higher on his shoulder. "But according to your Gran, there's a sudden and catastrophic damp problem that requires me to vacate immediately." The pieces clicked into place. The silent dinner, the separate, hurried goodbyes, the carefully worded, singular invitations. My blood ran cold, then hot. We'd been played. Both of us. Checkmated by an 80-year-old woman in a tartan scarf. I stepped back, a gesture of horrified disbelief, and he took it as an invitation, stalking past me into the room. He dropped his bag on the floor with a heavy thud that seemed to shake the whole cottage. The space, already small, instantly shrank by half. He was just so much, so solid. He took up a space in the world that was impossible to ignore, radiating a heat that felt like a furnace in the damp little room. He smelled of rain, wood smoke, and something uniquely him, the malty, sweet scent of the distillery that clung to him like a second skin. "She kicked you out?" I asked, the words feeling stupid and redundant as soon as they left my mouth. "Said the assessor was coming. Condemned the whole section above the still house until it was fixed." He ran a hand through his wet hair, looking around the gatehouse with utter disgust. "There's no damp problem, Fox. I built those bloody walls myself." "And there's no second bedroom in here," I shot back, jabbing a thumb toward the paint can disaster. "Just a glorified cupboard full of her delusions of being an interior designer." We stood there for a long moment. Two sworn enemies, united by a common, formidable foe. His anger wasn't the explosive kind. It was a slow drip distillation, potent and bitter. I could practically taste the resentment coming off him. It was probably mutual. His gaze swept the room again. Over the lumpy sofa, the dusty fireplace, the single armchair, and then his eyes landed on the open door to the bedroom, on the one solitary, neatly made double bed. The air thickened, suddenly humid and close. I could feel my pulse, a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. The room, which had felt merely small, now felt suffocating. Every curated instinct in me screamed. This was a violation of protocol, a catastrophic failure of planning. My perfectly ordered world had been invaded by a large, scowling, damp Highlander. He looked at the bed, he looked at me. A new, more personal storm was gathering in his eyes. "Absolutely not," he said, his voice a low rumble. "My thoughts exactly," I snapped, crossing my arms over my chest. It was a defensive posture, and I hated myself for it. I felt like a cat arching its back, trying to look bigger than it was. It was a lost cause. Next to him, I felt like a swizzle stick. I was here first. Gran gave it to me. She gave it to you based on a lie. Half this place should be mine, based on a separate lie. That makes the bed contested territory. I let out a short, incredulous laugh. Contested territory. Are we drawing up a treaty? He didn't smile. He just stared at the bed, then back at me, his face an impassive mask. My own heart was hammering. The image of sharing that space, the proximity, the sheer physical fact of him sleeping inches away, sent a jolt of something akin to panic through me.
Chapter 6. Sharing a room with Ewan Fox is like trying to sleep next to a very expensive, quietly judging cat, one that smells of sandalwood and considers the lumpy sofa you're on to be a profound personal failure. I'm on that sofa now, a thin blanket pulled up to my chin, and every breath he takes from the bed across the room is a quiet indictment. They're even, measured breaths, the kind of breathing a person does when they're not worried about a distillery going under or sharing a one-room cottage with their mortal enemy. The springs of the sofa dig into my spine like bony fingers. The peat smoke scent of my own jacket, slung over a chair, is the only familiar thing in the dark. Sleep doesn't come. My mind just churns, replaying Gran's hopeful, desperate face, replaying the sight of Ewan stepping out of his ludicrously clean car like a laird returning to his estate. He's here to save us. My teeth grind together. He's not saving anything. He's branding it. He's packaging our history, our sweat, our family, and he's going to sell it, with me as a co-star. My heart gives a painful thud against my ribs. When the gray Glen Cailleach dawn finally seeps through the window, I feel like I've been wrestling a boar all night. I haven't moved. Ewan is already awake, of course. He's sitting on the edge of the bed, dressed in dark jeans and a cashmere jumper the color of a stormy sky. He's running a hand through his perfectly rumpled hair, and my first coherent thought is an uncharitable one. Even his bedhead looks like it costs a fortune. "Morning," he says, his voice crisp. He doesn't look tired at all. He looks energized. Is it? I grunt, swinging my legs off the sofa. My back protests with a series of loud clicks. I feel about 100 years old. He ignores my tone, his eyes already scanning the room, as if assessing its strategic weaknesses. We need to talk. I'm making coffee first. It's not a request. I need caffeine to deal with him. I need the mundane ritual of scooping grounds and waiting for water to boil to fortify myself against whatever corporate nonsense he's about to spew. He watches me move around the tiny kitchenette, his focus unnervingly absolute. I can feel his gaze on my back as I fill the kettle. It makes the small hairs on my neck prickle. I was thinking last night, he begins, and I have to bite back a laugh. He was sleeping like a baby. We need to establish our relationship pillars. I turn around, kettle in hand. Or what? Pillars. He has the audacity to look earnest. He's pulled a slim black notebook and a frighteningly elegant pen from his bag. The foundational values of our partnership. For the brand story to have authenticity, the central relationship needs to be built on a believable framework. I just stare at him. The water in the kettle begins to hiss. You want to workshop our fake romance? A corner of his mouth ticks up. A flicker of the Ewan I remember, the one who always knew he was the smartest person in the room. We need a narrative. Touch points. A plausible backstory that can withstand scrutiny from the festival judges, the press, anyone. I pour the hot water over the coffee grounds, the steam rising between us. The rich, dark smell does little to soothe the knot of irritation tightening in my gut. Right. And I suppose we'll need a Q3 mission statement and some key performance indicators for our kissing targets. He doesn't even blink. He taps the pen against his notebook. That's phase 2. Let's start with the origin story. How did we reconnect? I've been gone 10 years. You've been here. There's a natural narrative tension there. Prodigal son returns, finds his roots, and the steady, dependable man who never left. The word dependable lands like a stone. It's what people call you when they mean boring, unambitious, stuck. My hand tightens around my mug. I'm not a character in one of your marketing campaigns, Ewan. We both are now, Jamie. Your gran made sure of that. He flips open the notebook. Pillar 1, mutual respect for the craft. I respect your skill as a distiller. You respect my palate as a sommelier. It's our professional common ground. The whiskey is our love language. A wave of something like nausea rolls through me. The whiskey is my life's work. It's not a prop. It's the heart of the story, he counters, his voice smooth, reasonable, infuriating. Pillar 2, shared history. We grew up together. That gives us a deep foundational layer of connection. We can lean into the childhood friends to strangers to lovers trope. It's classic. It sells. The heat rises up my neck. My throat feels tight. All night I've been trying to push it down, the old hurt, the raw teenage humiliation. But here he is, trying to polish it up and sell it, to turn the worst day of my life into a narrative touchpoint. So what is it? I ask, my voice low and rough. What's our plausible backstory, Ewan? He looks up from his notes, a focused, professional gleam in his dark honey eyes. Well, I was thinking we drifted apart after school, which is true. Then maybe I saw an article about the work you were doing here. I was impressed. I reached out, tentatively at first. A few emails, then phone calls, a slow burn. We rediscovered what we'd lost. He smiles, a practiced, charming thing that doesn't reach his eyes. It's believable. It's authentic. The coffee mug is hot in my hands, but a different kind of burn is blazing through me. The sheer breathtaking arrogance of him, to stand there and erase everything, to rewrite our history into something palatable and marketable. I set the mug down on the counter with a loud crack. You want a plausible backstory? His smile falters, he lowers his pen. Yes, that's the goal. Okay. I take a step toward him. He's still sitting on the bed, looking up at me, the ridiculous notebook open on his lap. Here's one. We were friends, or I thought we were. Then at the Glen Cailleach, you got up on the stage. You had a bottle of cheap cider in your hand, and the attention of the entire school. And you did a perfect imitation of me. You mimicked my accent. You mimicked the way I walked. You called me a peat-brained bog-trotter who'd be lucky to spend his life shoveling barley for someone smarter. The color drains from his face. The marketing guru vanishes, and for the first time all morning, a flicker of the 17-year-old boy I remember is there in his eyes. Just for a second. And then I press on, the words tasting like rust in my mouth. When everyone was laughing, you pointed at me. and said you couldn't wait to get out of this backwards little town and away from the people holding it back. Then you ran away to the city to become a big, important man. You never spoke to me again. Our backstory is you humiliated me in front of everyone I'd ever known, and then you vanished. I'm breathing hard, my heart hammering against my ribs. The silence in the cottage is absolute, thick with the decade of resentment I've just spilled onto the floor between us. Ewan's mouth opens, a protest or an apology ready to form. How's that? I say, my voice shaking with a fury I haven't felt in years, for a touch point. Before he can answer, the gatehouse door bangs open, hitting the wall with a thud that makes us both jump. Jamie, you lazy sod, Gran said you were holed up in here sulking. Theo Campbell stands framed in the doorway, a canvas bag of what smells like.
Chapter 7. The first rule of fake dating, apparently, is that your fake boyfriend's terrifyingly perceptive best friend gets to be the first person you have to lie to. She stands in the doorway, a canvas bag clutched in one hand, smelling of yeast and sunshine. Theo Campbell. Her red hair is a chaotic halo around a face full of freckles and suspicion. Her gaze flicks from Jamie's thunderous expression to my own, no doubt exquisitely tailored panic. The air, thick with a decade of our spilled resentment, instantly evaporates, replaced by a new, much more immediate kind of dread. My heart gives a painful lurch, like a car stalling on a steep hill. "Am I interrupting something?" Theo asks, her voice dangerously bright. "No," Jamie and I say at the exact same time. A dead giveaway. I resist the urge to slam my face into my hands. Jamie shoves his hands in his pockets, his shoulders bunching up around his ears. He looks like a cornered badger. "Theo, we were talking." "Talking," she repeats, stepping inside and letting the door swing shut. She drops her bag on a stool, the scent of fresh bread now warring with the distillery's angel's share. "It looked more like one of you was about to set the other one on fire." My mouth is dry. I need a script. I need a publicist. I need a drink that isn't implicated in this whole mess. I force a smile that feels like it might crack my face in two. Just a spirited debate about cask finishing. It's a weak lie, but it's the only one I have. It's also technically my job. Theo's eyes, the color of a summer lock, narrow on me. "You, Ewan Fox. Gran said you were back." She says my name like it's a particularly stubborn stain she's trying to scrub out. "Didn't expect to see you in here with him." Jamie grunts. It's his primary form of communication, a sort of human bagpipe drone that can mean anything from hello to I am contemplating murder. This is it, the first public test. My glib city charm against her Highland bullshit detector. I feel a surprising, nauseating pang of wanting to pass. I don't just need to fool her for the plan. I find myself wanting Theo Campbell to actually like me. The thought is so foreign it makes my stomach tighten. "Well," I start, my voice smoother than I feel. Things change. I glance at Jamie, trying to project an affection I couldn't generate with a team of Hollywood screenwriters. "We've been reconnecting." Theo raises a single skeptical eyebrow. "Reconnecting. You too. The last time you reconnected, Jamie had to get 3 stitches, and you were banned from the annual sheepdog trials for life." Jamie mutters, "It was a misunderstanding with the prize-winning border collie." "You called him a pedestrian overachiever, Jamie." I clear my throat. "Water under the bridge. A lot of water. A veritable flood, really. Entire civilizations washed away." I'm babbling. Theo isn't buying it. She crosses her arms, her stance as immovable as the mountains outside. "Right. So what's this I hear from your gran about you saving the distillery? With a story? A romance?" The air quotes are practically dripping with acid. My blood runs cold. Of course, Gran told Theo. In Glen Cailleach, gossip travels faster than light. Jamie looks like he's about to bolt. I have to take control. I step closer to him, an act that feels like approaching a bear with a sore head, and force myself to look at Theo. It was a bit of a surprise to us too, but when we started talking again, it just sort of happened, Theo says flatly. "In Glasgow," I add, pulling a detail from thin air. "A few months ago, we ran into each other, had a drink, talked." Jamie makes a strangled noise. I subtly nudge him with my elbow. Play along, you great lump. He clears his throat. Aye, we did. Theo looks between us, her head tilted. She is a hawk circling its prey. You hate Glasgow. I was there for a blending conference, Jamie grumbles, which is at least plausible. And you two, who haven't spoken a civil word since you were 17, just happened to have a drink and fall madly in love? It wasn't quite so dramatic, I say, trying to dial it back. More of a gradual rekindling. My tongue feels thick. Every word is a lie, and they all taste like ash. Look, Theo, I know how it seems, but we're giving it a go. She stares at us for a long, silent moment. My pulse is a frantic drum against my ribs. Then she uncrosses her arms. Fine. I nearly sag with relief. Prove it, she says. The Black Stag, tonight. You, me, and him. If you can survive a pint under the scrutiny of the entire village, I might believe you. She scoops up her bag of bread. Don't be late. And with that she's gone, leaving the scent of her baking and a fresh wave of terror in her wake. Jamie turns on me, his face grim. The Black Stag? Are you insane? We'll be eaten alive. We'll be fine, I lie, my own bravado tasting thin. Just follow my lead, and for God's sake, try not to look like you're being held hostage. Hours later, we're back in the gatehouse, having somehow survived. The pub was an ordeal, a gauntlet of raised eyebrows and whispered questions. I talked enough for 3 people, spinning a clumsy but just about believable narrative of our rekindled romance, while Jamie sat beside me, nursing a single pint and grunting his agreement at strategic intervals. It was the most excruciatingly collaborative thing we'd ever done. My jaw aches from smiling. The silence in the small room is heavy now, broken only by the hum of the small refrigerator. The lingering adrenaline from our public performance leaves a metallic taste in my mouth. Well, I say, loosening my collar, that wasn't a complete disaster. Jamie just scowls and turns back to the workbench, where a row of small, numbered glasses sits in a neat line. The failed experiments, the source of his sulking when Theo arrived. You never said what the spirited debate was actually about, I say, gesturing to the glasses. My curiosity, for the first time, is professional. I'm tired of pretending. This, at least, is a language we both speak. The cask finishing. He shrugs, his back still to me. Doesn't matter. It's not working. He half turns, his expression laced with suspicion. Why? Because I spent 3 years learning how to do exactly this, and I'm bored of talking about my feelings, I say, my voice sharper than I intend. Humor me. He hesitates, then gives a curt nod towards the bench, an invitation, or a challenge. I step up to the workbench, rolling up the sleeves of my cashmere jumper. The gesture feels strangely formal, like a surgeon scrubbing in. I pick up the first glass, marked with a grease pencil. Number 14, port pipe finish. I don't drink it. Not yet. I bring the rim to my nose, close my eyes, and inhale. My world shrinks to the contents of this glass. The slick, polished performance in the pub melts away. This is real. This is my arena. The first wave is classic Auld Brose, heather honey, a hint of sea salt, the ghost of peat smoke. Then comes the finish. Sweet red fruits, plum, a bit of black currant. It's good. It's competent. It's also completely boring. The port is overpowering the spirit, I say, not looking at him. You've lost the distillery character. It tastes like something any Speyside distillery could make. I move to the next. Number 15, Sherry Oloroso. I swirl, nose, and then take a tiny sip, letting it coat my tongue. I'm not tasting for pleasure. I'm decoding, looking for the one misplaced letter that warps the entire message. Better, I concede. The sherry complements the honey notes, but it's too sweet on the finish, almost cloying. You need more spice to cut through it. I continue down the line, my focus absolute. I call out notes, observations. A hint of sulfur on one, suggesting a flawed cask, a lack of depth on another, likely from second fill wood that had given all it had to give. Jamie stays silent, but I can feel his eyes on me. I'm not showing off. I'm just working. For the first time since I've been back, I feel like myself. Then I get to the last glass. Number 18, Virgin Oak. I lift it, and the nose is immediately different. Brighter. Vanilla, coconut. Chapter 8. For a man who looked like he wanted to murder me with a bung hammer, Jamie MacLeod was surprisingly open to a compliment. He just stared at me, his mouth a straight line, the smudge of soot on his cheeks stark against the sudden flush of his skin. Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy as the smell of malted barley hanging in the air. He blinked once, a slow, deliberate motion. You really think so? The question was quiet, stripped of its usual belligerence. It was almost vulnerable, and that, more than any argument could have, completely disarmed me. I do, I said, my own voice softer than I intended. It's bold. It's got character. Most distilleries are terrified of virgin oak. Jamie let out a short, sharp breath that wasn't quite a laugh. He ran a hand through his bracken-colored hair, leaving a faint gray streak. Most distilleries have marketing departments. A truce. A fragile, unspoken one, but a truce nonetheless. A prickle of something that felt dangerously like professional curiosity sparked in my chest. I gestured vaguely around the warehouse. So this is all you. He looked at the towering racks of casks, then back at me. A different kind of light was in his eyes now, not the hot fire of anger, but the low, steady glow of ownership. Most of it. He hesitated, his broad shoulders shifting under his worn jumper. You've seen the casks? You want to see the rest? I did, more than I thought I would. All right, MacLeod, show me what you've got. He led me from the cool, earthy dark of the warehouse back toward the main building. The air changed, growing warmer and thick with the sweet, wholesome scent of porridge. We entered a cavernous room, dominated by a massive stainless steel vessel. The mash tun, he said, his voice echoing slightly. This is where it starts. Hot water and grist. I knew the process, of course. I'd read it in 100 books, seen it on a dozen glossy corporate tours, where everything was polished to a gleam and sealed behind glass. This was different. This was raw. Steam ghosted toward the rafters. The floor was damp. It smelled like breakfast and beer. Jamie leaned over the railing, pointing. The wort runs off, we cool it, then it goes to the washbacks. He spoke with a new authority. The stubborn scowl was gone, replaced by the focused intensity of a master craftsman in his element. He was explaining his process. His process. This wasn't something he'd inherited and maintained. This was something he lived in. I found myself leaning closer, listening. He wasn't talking to the prodigal grandson or the city slicker. He was a distiller, talking about his trade. The still house was next. My breath caught in my throat. The room was dominated by two enormous copper stills, their swan necks arching gracefully toward the ceiling like strange metallic beasts. Burnished by years of heat and steam and loving polish, dented in places, patched in others, they hummed with a low, latent energy. The air was hot and thick with a smell I couldn't quite place, sharp and fruity and clean. Jamie walked between them, laying a hand on the warm copper of the larger wash still. The gesture was unconsciously tender. This is where the magic happens. We heat the wash, the alcohol turns to vapor, rises up the neck, and condenses back into a liquid. We do it twice. Simple as that. It wasn't simple at all. It was alchemy. It was turning grain and water and time into liquid gold. The light from the high windows caught the curve of the copper, and I saw 100 years of history reflected in its surface. My bespoke suits, my minimalist flat, my curated life in Glasgow, it all felt thin and sterile compared to this. This solid, thrumming reality. My polish cracked. The wry smirk I used as armor fell away. It's beautiful. Jamie looked from his still to me, his expression unreadable. For a second I thought he was going to scoff, to call me a soft city idiot, but he didn't. He just nodded slowly, his gaze sweeping the room, the pipes, the spirit safe with its gleaming brass locks. It's home, he said. The word landed in my gut like a stone. Home. For me, the word was a web of obligations and regrets, a place to escape from. For him, it was this noisy, fragrant working heart of a distillery. And for the first time, I think I understood him. Not the surly boy I remembered, but the man who had stayed. The man who had built a life inside these stone walls while I was busy building a fortress around mine.
A thought unbidden and sharp cut through the haze. An idea. The virgin oak, I started, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. What if you didn't bottle it on its own? Jamie's brows furrowed. What do you mean? It's powerful, a bully almost. It could easily overpower a blend. I started pacing, the excitement of the puzzle taking over. My mind works in flavor maps, in webs of connection. But what if you used it to wake something up? Take one of your more traditional sherry casks, one of those first fills that's heavy on the raisin and fruitcake notes, and finish it for just a few months in that virgin oak. I stopped, looking at him. The sherry cask provides the body, the deep classic Speyside foundation. The virgin oak comes in at the end and brightens it. It would add a layer of spice, that vanilla and coconut, a kind of structural integrity to the finish. It would be traditional and modern at the same time. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the spirit safe, but I knew he was seeing the casks, tasting the combination in his mind just as I was. He was mapping it out. He builds the whiskey like an architect. I deconstruct it like a critic. Maybe, just maybe, those two skills could create something new. A few months might be too long, he said finally, his voice thoughtful. The wood's too active. It'd get bitter. 6 weeks, maybe 8. My heart gave a stupid, enthusiastic leap. He wasn't dismissing it. It'd be a risk, he murmured, but there was a glint in his eye. The same glint I'd seen when he'd looked at the virgin oak cask. The thrill of the gamble. The best ones always are, I said. We stood there for a beat, the hum of the stills filling the space between us. A partnership. It was fragile, it was tentative, but it felt real. We were two sides of the same coin, the maker and the taster. And for a split second we were perfectly balanced. The door to the still house banged open, shattering the moment. Elsie bustled in, her face flushed, and her phone clutched in her hand like a holy relic. There you are. I've been looking everywhere. Jamie and I both straightened, the invisible line between us snapping taut once more. What is it, Elsie? Jamie asked, his voice already losing its warmth. The most wonderful news, she chirped, beaming at us. She had that look on her face, the one that said she'd been meddling and was immensely proud of the results. My stomach nodded. I just got off the phone with Morag from the Dram Catcher. You know, the blog? She has 50,000 followers. I had a very, very bad feeling about this. She loves the story, Elsie continued, oblivious to the sudden deep freeze in the room. The prodigal grandson returning to his roots, the old-school distiller, the unlikely romance saving the family business. She said it's exactly the kind of human interest piece her readers go wild for. She's coming up from Edinburgh on Friday to do a pre-festival feature. Elsie clasped her hands together, her eyes shining.
Chapter 9. Performing a relationship for a woman whose Instagram handle is @whiskeywench is even less dignified than it sounds. Her real name is Clara, and she arrives not in a flurry of hashtags and sponsored content, but in a sensible Land Rover with a trunk full of serious camera equipment. She's sharp, maybe mid-30s, with an expensive haircut and eyes that assess everything with the cool calculation of a tax auditor. This is, somehow, worse. A flighty influencer I could manage, condescend to, manipulate. This woman looks like she could spot a fraudulent balance sheet from 50 paces. Our fraudulent relationship must look like child's play. So, the Dunnage warehouse, she says, her voice crisp as a new banknote. Elsie, your grandmother is an absolute gem, by the way, suggested we start there. The light, the history, it's the heart of the place, she said. My gran, the master propagandist. I nod, arranging my features into something I hope looks like charming enthusiasm. It feels like stretching a muscle I haven't used in a decade. Of course, it's where the magic happens. Beside me, Jamie makes a sound like a straining tractor engine. He's wearing his usual uniform of soot-dusted work shirt and scowl, hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looks about as magical as a blocked drain. Lead the way, Clara says, hoisting a camera bag that looks heavier than my entire carry-on. The walk to the warehouse is a masterclass in awkward silence. I am hyper-aware of the space between me and Jamie, a foot of charged air that feels like a yawning chasm. Clara walks just ahead, her boots crunching on the gravel. occasionally aiming her phone to capture the slate-gray sky or a moss-covered wall. She's building a portfolio of misery before we've even begun. I need to take control. This is a performance, and I am the director. You don't let the ingredients dictate the dish, you command them. So, I say, pitching my voice to Carrie, Jamie was just telling me this morning how the humidity in here is perfect for a slow, gentle maturation. Jamie shoots me a look that could curdle milk. I was not. You were thinking it, though. I press on, offering Clara a conspiratorial smile. He's the strong, silent type. All his poetry goes into the whiskey. Clara's lips twitch. It might be a smile. It might be a grimace. We step inside the warehouse. The air immediately changes. It's cool and damp, thick with the scent of raw earth, wet stone, and the glorious, unmistakable perfume of the angel's share. That sweet, oaky vapor of evaporating spirit. It's the smell of my childhood. It's the smell of home, the real one I try not to remember. Ranks of barrels stretch into the gloom, sleeping giants stacked 3 high. Dust motes dance in the thin shafts of light, slanting from the high, grimy windows. Oh, this is perfect, Clara breathes, her professional shell cracking to reveal a sliver of genuine reverence. She unslings her camera. Just exist, mingle, pretend I'm not here. An impossible task. Her presence is the entire point. I turn to Jamie, lowering my voice. Right, time to earn our festival spot. Stand closer. He doesn't move. I feel like a prize idiot. Join the club. Now, for the love of God, look at me like you don't want to set me on fire. I gesture towards a stack of hogsheads. Let's go over there. The light's better. I lead him deeper into the forest of casks. I can feel Clara's lens on us, a heavy, expectant weight. My skin prickles. I'm curating a moment. The handsome city boy, captivated by the rugged distiller in his natural habitat. It's a story, a flavor profile. It just needs the right notes. Put your hand on that barrel, I instruct. Look thoughtful. He glares at me, but does it. His large, faintly grimy hand rests on the dark, stained wood. Good. Now I'm going to stand here. I position myself next to him, close enough that the sleeve of my cashmere jumper brushes his arm. My heart gives a nervous little skip. And I'm going to laugh as if you've just said something witty. I haven't said anything. Use your imagination, I hiss, then produce a light, airy laugh. It sounds utterly fake even to my own ears. From behind us, a shutter clicks. This is a bloody nightmare, Jamie mutters, his jaw tight. It's marketing, I correct him. Now look at me. He turns his head. His eyes, the color of the peat-darkened water of the local burn, are blazing with frustration. The scowl is back in full force. Not like that, I sigh. Look at me like you're happy I'm here. But I'm not. Jamie, my voice is sharp. Just for 5 minutes. Can you pretend? Something in his expression shifts. The anger recedes, replaced by a raw, rough-edged hurt that hits me squarely in the chest. It's a look I remember from a long time ago. Fine, he says, his voice gone low and gravelly. Stop directing, then. If we're doing this, we're doing it. Before I can process what he means, he moves. He doesn't just stand closer. He eliminates the space between us entirely. And then he reaches out and takes my hand. My brain whites out. It's not a stage-managed gesture. It's a capture. His fingers, rough with calluses and surprisingly warm, wrap around mine. His palm is broad and solid, swallowing my own. It's not gentle. It's a statement, a claim. My entire carefully constructed performance short-circuits. All the notes, the angles, the curated narrative, gone. There is only the shocking, undeniable reality of his hand holding mine. A current sings up my arm, straight to my heart, which gives a painful, stuttering lurch. My throat tightens. I can't breathe. I can't think. I can only feel the rough texture of his skin against my own, the steady, grounding weight of him. We're just standing there, silhouetted against the sleeping barrels, hands clasped. The silence in the warehouse is absolute, broken only by the distant click of Clara's camera. He doesn't let go. I don't pull away. My gaze drops to our joined hands, then lifts back to his face. The scowl is gone. In its place is something complicated and quiet. He's looking at our hands, too. The new bottling, I say, the words feeling clumsy and thick in my mouth. It's the only safe topic I can find. The one for the festival. You think it's ready? Jamie's gaze lifts to meet mine. It's close, he says, and his voice is just for me, not for the camera. It's got the smoke. The heather honey is coming through, but it needs something else, a bit of brightness at the end. A citrus note? I suggest, my sommelier brain kicking in on instinct, a drowning man grabbing for a life raft. Like candied orange peel? Maybe. A genuine flicker of interest lights his eyes. I was thinking more green apple, something sharp to cut through the richness. We're talking. We're actually talking, not sniping or performing, about the whiskey. The one thing that has always connected us. A bridge of peat and barley spanning the chasm of years and resentment. And he's still holding my hand. It feels less like a capture now and more like an anchor. Solid, warm, frighteningly real. I can feel the pulse in my wrist, a frantic trapped bird, and I wonder if he can feel it too. Neither of us lets go. The seconds stretch into a minute, then two. The air between us is no longer a chasm, but a thin, trembling wire. A sudden bright flash makes us both jump. We turn. Clara is lowering her camera, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across her face. She looks from me to Jamie, then to our still clasped hands. There it is, she says, her voice soft but triumphant. She taps the back of her camera. The story of Auld Brose isn't just about the whiskey, is it? It's the story of you two. People are going to love this. A jolt of pure, undiluted panic shoots through me. It sinks deeper than the lie, deeper than the marketing, deeper than the fear of being found out. It's a terror that has absolutely nothing to do with saving the distillery, and everything to do with the fact that, for the last 5 minutes, I hadn't been pretending at all. Chapter 10. My hand still felt warm where he'd held it. The phantom pressure lingered long after the blogger had packed up her camera and driven away, a ghost of a touch that I kept flexing my fingers against, trying to shake it loose. It refused to go. The post went live an hour later. Elsie's phone started pinging first, a series of triumphant little chimes from the pocket of her work coat. Then mine buzzed, then Ewan's. Auld Brose's dormant social media accounts lit up like a switchboard. The photos were good, I had to admit. Deceptively good. Morag had captured the late afternoon sun slanting through the dusty air of the warehouse, turning the copper stills into molten gold. She'd caught the quiet camaraderie, the shared glances, the way Ewan had brushed a stray piece of barley from my sleeve, and the hand-holding. There it was, a close-up of our joined hands against the dark oak of a cask. His long, pale fingers laced through my calloused, shorter ones. It looked real. The caption was a masterpiece of romantic fluff. From childhood rivals to partners in life and liquor, the future of Auld Brose is in the safest of hands. The comments, Jamie. Read the comments. Elsie was practically vibrating with glee, her face illuminated by the blue light of her screen. They love it. This is the story we need right now. Booking a trip to Scotland immediately. Oh, this one says Ewan has sad poet eyes. Ewan, leaning against the doorway of the tasting room, made a pained face at that, but he couldn't hide the small, pleased quirk of his mouth. My own phone buzzed again with a notification. An order, then another, and another. The numbers on our online shop's dashboard, usually as sluggish as cold treacle, started to climb. Elsie threw her arms around my neck in a fierce, papery hug. It's working, I knew it would work. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic two-step beat of relief and dread. This was for her, for the distillery, for the town. But the lie was growing, sprouting legs and running away from us, and the space between the lie and the truth was getting uncomfortably narrow. A truth that involved the lingering heat on my palm, and the way I couldn't seem to look at Ewan without my throat tightening. That night, sleep was a skittish animal I couldn't catch. I tossed and turned, the sheets twisting around my legs like binds. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that photo of our hands, felt the weight of his grip. I finally gave up,
pulling on a pair of old jeans and a thick jumper. The air outside was cold and clean, smelling of damp earth and the distant sweet scent of the wort. My feet, acting on their own accord, carried me down the gravel path toward the distillery. A single light shone from a grimy window on the ground floor, not the still house, but the archives, a room filled with a century of paper. A place so dusty and forgotten I hadn't been inside in years. Curiosity, sharp and unwelcome, pulled me toward the door. I found him there, a lone figure hunched over a heavy, leather-bound ledger under the bare bulb of a desk lamp. Dust motes danced in the cone of light, swirling around his dark hair. The cavernous room was a crypt of forgotten history, shelves groaning under the weight of invoices, tasting notes, and wage books dating back to my great-great-grandfather's time. The air was thick with the smell of decaying paper and dry ink. "Can't sleep either?" I asked, my voice sounding rough in the quiet. He jumped, startled, his head snapping up. The polished city mask was gone. In its place was just Ewan, looking younger and more uncertain than I'd ever seen him. "God, you move quietly for a big guy." "Part of the job," I gestured to the pile of books. "Bit of light reading?" He ran a hand through his hair, messing up its usual perfect arrangement. "I was looking for something. An old recipe, an idea, I don't know. Gran always said everything we ever were is in these books." He sighed, a gust of breath that stirred the dust on the page. Turns out we were mostly concerned with the price of peat in 1952. I moved farther into the room, my boots echoing on the stone floor. I stopped by a shelf, running a finger along the spines of the ledgers. "You hate it here, don't you?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a fact I wanted to confirm. He didn't answer right away. He just stared down at the spidery script in the book before him. "No," he said, his voice quiet. "That's not it. I never hated it." He looked up at me then, and his eyes, the sad poet eyes, were stripped bare of all their usual irony. I hated me, here. The confession hung in the dusty air between us. The silence wasn't empty. It was fermenting, changing into something new and potent. "Everyone here knew how to be," he continued, his gaze drifting around the room as if the ghosts of the past were watching him. "They could fix a tractor, build a wall, handle their drink, handle their fists. Your dad, my dad, you were all solid, like you were carved from the same granite as the hills." He picked at a loose thread on the ledger's binding. "And I was not. I liked books more than shinty. I wanted to know why a wine from Burgundy tasted different than one from Bordeaux. I tried, Jamie, I really did. But every time I tried to fit into that mold, it felt like I was breaking my own bones to do it. The resentment I'd carried for a decade, a hard, cold stone in the pit of my stomach, began to dissolve. It wasn't a sudden flood, but a slow, warm trickle of understanding. He hadn't left because he thought he was better than us. He'd left because he was terrified he wasn't good enough. The arrogant man I'd resented for so long was a phantom. The person in front of me was just a boy who'd felt like a counterfeit coin in a jar of real silver. "Of everyone watching," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "waiting for you to prove you're not as soft as they think you are." It was suffocating. So I ran. I went somewhere I could decide who I was, without having to measure up to men like your father. A knot I hadn't even known was there began to loosen in my chest. All this time, I'd seen his departure as a judgment on Glen Cailleach, on me. It had never once occurred to me that the judgment had been turned inward. The quiet settled around us again, heavier this time, weighted with his truth, and I knew I had to offer one of my own. "The Cailleach," I said, my voice low. "The one before you left." He flinched, his shoulders tightening. "Don't. I was a stupid, cruel kid." "You were," I agreed, but my tone was gentle. "But you've got it wrong. For you, that night was about humiliation, about being laughed at." I took a breath, the dusty air scraping my lungs. "For me, it was about having my first real crush, the boy I spent half my time trying to impress, and the other half trying not to stare at, point at me in front of the entire village, and laugh like I was the punchline to a joke I didn't understand." His head came up slowly. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin the color of bleached bone. The air in the room grew thin, charged. A decade of anger, of hurt, of misunderstanding was suddenly laid bare on the dusty floor between us, and for the first time, Ewan Fox looked at me as if he was seeing me at all.
Chapter 11. He thinks I was mocking him. The words hang between us, sharp and glittering as shattered glass. And the terrible, hilarious, gut-wrenching truth of it is that I was terrified he'd see I liked him too. His accusation lands, and the air in the cramped gatehouse thins out, becoming impossible to breathe. My lungs seize. For a decade, I've carried the memory of that night like a corked bottle of wine, the contents soured, the pressure building. I thought the shame was mine alone. I never imagined he'd kept a shard of it for himself. Fox? Jamie's voice is low, dangerous. The single name is a prod, a demand for the answer I owe him. He's watching me from the other end of the lumpy tartan sofa. His face, which moments ago was open and almost soft in the dim light, is now set like granite. The angry, defensive Jamie MacLeod I know, the one I created. My own face feels like a mask that's cracking apart. The polished city sommelier is gone, evaporated into the damp, peaty air. In his place is a 17-year-old boy with a heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. My throat is tight. My hands, resting on my knees, are slick with sweat. I didn't. My voice is a disgrace, a dry, rasping thing. I clear my throat, trying to find purchase. I wasn't laughing at you. He gives a short, bitter huff of a laugh. Looked a lot like it from where I was standing. You, your mates, pointing right at me. I was pointing, I concede, the words tasting like rust. But not at you, not really. How do I explain this? How do I articulate a decade of regret without it sounding like a pathetic, self-serving excuse? The curated narrative of my life, cool, collected, untouchable Ewan Fox, is a fiction. The truth is messy and humiliating. I take a breath. It does nothing to calm the frantic thrumming in my veins. I saw you, I begin, looking at the floor, at a loose thread on the worn rug. I can't look at him, not yet. You were across the hall, dancing with I don't even remember who. Fiona Campbell, maybe. You were laughing. The memory is so clear, it's as if a switch has been flipped. The drone of the pipes, the heat of too many bodies packed into the village hall, the dizzying spin of the dashing white sergeant, and Jamie. He was all broad shoulders in his kilt, his hair a wild, coppery mess. He moved with a clumsy grace that was entirely his own, a force of nature in cheap tartan. He looked happy. He looked beautiful. And my 17-year-old heart did a stupid, painful lurch in my chest. A feeling like that, in a place like Glen Cailleach, felt like a dangerous secret. A flaw in my design that everyone would see if I wasn't careful. I'd been watching you all night, I admit to the floorboards. The confession is a stone dropping into a deep, silent well. I couldn't stop, and I was so terrified someone would notice, that you would notice. I risk a glance up. Jamie is perfectly still, his hands resting on his sturdy thighs. His expression is unreadable, but the hard line of his jaw has softened, almost imperceptibly. My mates were taking the piss out of me for being quiet, asking who I was staring at. My own laugh is brittle, full of self-loathing, and I panicked, utterly. It was like my brain just shut down. All I could think was, don't let them see. Don't let him know. So I did the first stupid thing that came to mind. I pointed. I lift my hand, reenacting the motion weakly. A gesture not of ridicule, but of frantic misdirection. There was this awful painting on the wall, some terrible watercolor of a stag that looked more like a sick dog. I pointed at it. I made some stupid joke about it, I don't even remember what, and I laughed, too loud. I laughed because if I didn't, I felt like I was going to throw up from sheer terror. The silence that follows is profound. It stretches, pulling the tension from the air, particle by particle. The only sounds are the hum of the old refrigerator from the kitchenette and the frantic beat of my own pulse in my ears. I've laid the rotten truth of it out on the table between us. He can take it or he can leave it. He can call me a liar and throw me out, and frankly, I probably deserve it. I feel hollowed out, drained. All the energy I've spent for 10 years holding that memory at bay, packaging it as a simple teenage gaffe, is gone. Now it's just the ugly, unvarnished thing it always was. an act of cowardice. I finally meet his eyes. The anger is gone, completely. In its place is a deep, unnerving stillness. He's looking at me, really looking, and it feels like he's seeing straight through the bespoke jumpers and the witty comebacks to the scared kid underneath. A long, shuddering breath escapes me. I was an idiot, I say, the words raw in my tight throat. And I was scared. Mostly I was scared of how much I wanted to dance with you. There, it's out. The final, deepest truth, the one I've barely even admitted to myself. Jamie's gaze doesn't waver. He just watches me, his brown eyes dark and serious in the lamplight. The seconds tick by, each one a lifetime. I brace myself for the verdict, for the scowl to return, for him to tell me to get out. Instead, he moves. Slowly, his hand, large, warm, calloused from work, lifts from his knee and travels the short distance across the sofa cushion. It covers my own, his fingers wrapping gently around mine. The contact is startling, a simple, solid weight that anchors me. My heart gives a painful thud. The silence holds for another moment, no longer empty, but filled with something new, something fragile. Then he speaks, his voice quiet, rough around the edges. We were both just bairns, Ewan. My name, not Fox, not the surname that has been a wall between us for a decade. Ewan. It lands with the weight of a treaty, a pardon, a beginning. And for the first time in 10 years, I feel the knot of shame in my gut, finally, blessedly, begin to unwind. Chapter 12. The new whiskey tastes like bonfire smoke, honey, and a second chance. I roll the amber liquid over my tongue, a small measure in a fat-bottomed glass. It's our festival trial, version 6. The peat is all mine, that familiar earthy punch of Islay tradition, the flavor of home. But then comes the finish, a smooth, lingering sweetness that coats the back of my throat, all raisins and warm spice. That's him. That's Ewan's sherry cask idea. On paper it was a risk, a city boy's flourish on a dram that didn't need fixing. In the glass, it's bloody magic. My eyes open. Ewan is watching me from across the workbench, perched on a stool like a nervous bird. He's chewing on his bottom lip, his dark hair falling over one eye. The low, golden light of the still house catches the faint scar through his eyebrow. He's shed his Glasgow armor, dressed in a dark green jumper that's probably worth more than my car, but it's softened by wear, fraying just a little at the cuffs. He looks younger like this, less like the curated Ewan Fox sommelier, and more like the lad I used to know. Well, he asks, his voice tight, is it pig swill? Be honest. I let the silence hang for a moment longer, just to watch the panic flicker in his eyes. A week ago I would have enjoyed it. Now it just feels mean. I clear my throat and set the glass down with a solid clink. It's not pig swill. He deflates with a rush of air. Thank God. For a second there I thought you were going to tell me it tasted like licking a bog. A laugh escapes me, rough and unused. No, the word sticks in my throat. Perfect. I can't quite say it. It feels too much like admitting something else. It's good, I manage. The sherry finish, it works. A slow, brilliant smile spreads across his face, and my stomach does a complicated sort of flip. It's a genuine smile, not one of the polite, sharp-edged things he uses for city folk. This one reaches his eyes, making them crinkle at the corners. Pride radiates off him in warm waves. Our pride. We've spent the better part of the day in here, the only sound the gentle hum of the cooling fans and the clink of glassware. A month ago, sharing a space this small with Ewan would have felt like being trapped in a shoebox with a wasp. Now, the silence is easy. We move around each other in a rhythm we found without trying, a silent dance of measuring and testing and tasting. My brute force knowledge of the stills and the malt, his refined palate that can pick a single note out of a symphony of flavor. It fits. We fit. The thought sends a jolt through me, hot and sharp. A success then, he says, his smile softening into something quieter. He looks around the still house, at the 2 towering copper stills that have been the backdrop of my entire life. They gleam under the lights, radiating a gentle warmth. It feels right, both of us in it. My heart gives a hard thump against my ribs. He's right. It's my peaty base, his sweet finish. It's the old ways and the new. It's Glen Cailleach and Glasgow. It's me and him, distilled, blended, and bottled.
I reach for the bottle and pour another measure into his glass, then top up my own. My hand is steady, a distiller's hand, but my pulse is a frantic drum against my wrist. To Auld Brose, I say, raising my glass. He meets my eyes over the rim of his own. The honey-dark gaze holds mine. To Auld Brose, he echoes, his voice a little thick. Our glasses touch with a soft chime. We drink. The whiskey is a warm weight in my belly, but a different kind of heat is spreading through my chest, coiling low and tight. It's been there for days, a low-burning peat fire I've been trying to ignore, to stamp out. But after yesterday, after he looked at me with such raw, unguarded honesty and said my name like it was a peace treaty, the fire is blazing. He sets his glass down, but he doesn't look away. The air between us is suddenly heavy, thick with the scent of malt, yeast, and something else. Something unnameable that's been building since the moment he walked back into my town. The lines we drew for the festival, for Gran, for the whole bloody world, they're not just blurred. They're gone, wiped clean away. All I can see is him. The slight flush on his cheeks from the whiskey, the way his throat moves as he swallows. The memory of his words echoes in my head. We were both just bairns. Forgiveness, he'd given it to me so easily, and in doing so he dismantled the last wall I had. My blood is roaring in my ears, loud as the sea. My body moves before my brain can veto the motion, before I can remind myself this is Ewan Fox, that this is a terrible, complicated, distillery-ruining idea. I close the 2 feet of distance between us. His breath hitches, a tiny, startled sound. His eyes widen, full of questions I don't have the words to answer. So I answer another way. I lean in and press my mouth to his. It's hesitant at first, just a question. His lips are softer than I imagined, and they taste of the whiskey we just made. For a heart-stopping second, he's perfectly still, and a cold wave of nausea crashes through me. Idiot, you've broken it. You've ruined everything. But then he makes a soft noise in the back of his throat, a sound of surrender, and his hand comes up to fist in the front of my shirt. He kisses me back, and the hesitation burns away like morning mist. It deepens into something else entirely, something that isn't for a blogger or a story or a festival prize. It's real. It's a decade of anger and misunderstanding and stupid, stubborn pride melting into a heap that leaves me breathless. I slide one hand from the workbench to the small of his back, pulling him closer until there's no space left between us at all. He feels solid against me, real and warm, and it's like slotting a final missing piece into place. The kiss is peat and promise, smoke and sweetness. It is the most terrifying and inevitable thing I have ever done. My lungs burn. My heart is a wild thing slamming against my ribs. I rest my forehead against his, trying to pull in a steadying breath. His own breathing is just as ragged. His eyes are closed, his dark lashes stark against his pale skin. The hand fisted in my shirt is trembling. Or maybe that's me. I can't tell where I end and he begins. He opens his eyes. They're dark, wide, and full of a dizzying mix of shock and something that looks terrifyingly like hope. The fake relationship, the carefully constructed story we were selling, it just went up in smoke. In its place is this, something raw and unnamed and impossibly real, and neither of us have a clue what to do now.
Chapter 13. A fake kiss is a performance, a set of stage directions. A real one is a chemical reaction, and the morning after is pure, unstable fallout. I woke with the ghost of it on my lips, a phantom pressure, a memory of warmth and the rough, soft texture of Jamie's mouth on mine. My heart gave a sickening lurch, the kind you get when you miss a step in the dark. I lay perfectly still, listening. The cottage was quiet, except for the moody sigh of the wind and the gentle ticking of the clock in the hall. He was already up. Of course he was. Jamie rises with the sun. I rise with my first espresso. Rolling out of bed felt like a monumental effort. Every nerve ending was frayed, exposed. I pulled on a jumper and jeans, the cashmere a flimsy shield against the charged air I knew was waiting for me downstairs. The kitchen was thick with it, an atmosphere so dense you could taste it. Jamie stood with his back to me, staring out the window over the sink, his broad shoulders set in a stiff line. A half-empty mug of tea was clutched in his hand. He didn't turn when I came in. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of the unspoken chaos of last night. "Morning," I managed. My voice was a croak. He gave a short, jerky nod, still facing the window. "Morning." This was impossible. We were sharing a space no bigger than my old Glasgow living room, and a canyon had just opened up between the toaster and the kettle. I moved to the counter, my actions feeling clumsy, exaggerated. I filled the kettle. The sound of the running water was deafening. I spooned coffee grounds into the French press. The metallic scrape felt like an accusation. He finally turned, but his gaze landed somewhere over my left shoulder. "Sleep okay?" "Fine," I lied. I hadn't slept. I'd spent hours replaying the kiss, trying to catalog it, to pin it down with tasting notes. But it defied analysis. It wasn't a story for the judges, or a means to an end. It was just Jamie. The surprising gentleness in his hands, the scent of peat and rain on his skin, the raw, unguarded look in his eyes when he'd pulled away. It was a note I'd never encountered, complex and wild and terrifyingly real. "Right," he said, his voice flat. He took his mug and rinsed it in the sink, the movement economical and final. He was shutting down, building his walls back up, brick by mortared brick, and I was just standing here, watching him do it. My throat felt tight. I had to say something. Anything. "Jamie, about last night." My phone buzzed on the counter, a harsh, insistent vibration that shattered the fragile tension. I flinched. We both looked at it, lying there like a grenade with the pin pulled. The screen lit up. Alistair Carmichael, my boss, the director of the restaurant group, the man who held the keys to the future I'd meticulously planned for myself. A jolt went through me. Pure, unadulterated ambition, honed over a decade of striving. I gestured vaguely at the phone. Jamie's expression was unreadable. He just nodded again, a muscle twitching in his jaw, and walked out of the kitchen, gone. The conversation aborted before it could even begin. A wave of frustration washed over me, quickly followed by the familiar Pavlovian response to Alistair's name. I grabbed the phone and retreated to the front door, stepping out into the damp, gray morning. The air was cold and smelled of wet earth, a world away from the climate-controlled dining rooms Alistair inhabited. I pressed accept. "Ewan, my boy," Alistair's voice boomed, slick and effusive. "Don't tell me you're still mucking about with the yopels. I trust your gran as well." "She's fine, Alistair. What's up?" I kept my voice low, pacing a short track on the gravel drive. "What's up is your future, Fox. What's up is the call I just got off. Remember Chef Dubois, the mad genius from Lyon?" My pulse quickened. "Of course, a 3-Michelin-star demigod. Well, he's opening in London, Mayfair, small, exclusive, reservations booked a year out before the paint is even dry. And he wants a head sommelier who's more than just a glorified wine waiter. He wants a storyteller. He wants you." The world tilted slightly. London, the job, head sommelier for a legend. It was the top of the mountain, the very peak I'd been climbing towards since I poured my first glass of cheap Merlot at a chain bistro. It was everything I wanted, wasn't it? "He asked for me by name?" My voice sounded distant. "Saw that piece about you in Decanter. Loved your whole narrative of the terroir angle. He's looking to build the most talked-about cellar in Europe. The budget is obscene. The clientele will be oligarchs and royalty. It's the big one, Ewan, the one we've been grooming you for." Grooming. The word hung in the air, suddenly feeling less like a compliment and more like a constraint. I looked back at the cottage. It was small and solid, a curl of smoke rising from its chimney into the bruised sky. Inside was a stubborn, maddening distiller who tasted of home. My heart was doing a strange, frantic rhythm, a battle between two opposing drums. One beat for the sleek, glittering prize of London. The other, a slower, deeper thrum, beat for this quiet, complicated place. "Ewan, you there? This is the part where you say, 'Yes, Alistair, that's the best news I've ever heard.'" I cleared my throat, forcing the professional mask into place. It felt stiff, ill-fitting. "Yes, Alistair, that sounds incredible." The words came out, the right words, but they felt like they belonged to someone else. Someone I was a few weeks ago. A huge opportunity. As I said it, I saw him. Jamie had come out of the cottage, his jacket slung over his arm. He was halfway towards me when he stopped dead. He must have heard me. He must have heard the ambition lacing my voice, the tone I used when I was closing a deal or charming a wealthy patron, the city me. His face was a study in collapse. I watched the fragile hope that had flickered there moments ago, the same hope I'd seen in his eyes after the kiss, get extinguished. It was like watching a candle flame gutter and die in a sudden draft. All that was left was a familiar, weary resignation. The look that said, "I knew it." My stomach plummeted. He couldn't hear the hesitation in my voice. He couldn't feel the war raging in my chest. He only heard the words, London, incredible, opportunity, and saw the man he always expected me to be, the polished city boy, passing through on his way to bigger, better things, the one who always leaves. "Alistair, I have to call you back," I said, my voice tight. "Ewan, don't be an idiot, we need to—" I ended the call, the silence rushing back in. But Jamie was already turning away. He didn't run, he just walked, his shoulders slumped, back towards the distillery and the life he had built here, leaving me standing alone in the gravel. The phone in my hand felt impossibly heavy, a golden ticket that had just cost me something I hadn't even realized I wanted to keep. Of course he thought I was leaving. Chapter 14. The taste of last night's kiss turned to ash in my mouth. One moment, I was standing in the pre-dawn chill of my bedroom, the phantom press of Ewan's lips, a warm, living thing on mine. The next, the memory of his phone call crashed over me. It's an incredible offer. I'd be a fool not to take it seriously. A fool. The word echoed in the quiet room. I was the fool. A project, a charming, rustic diversion, before he jetted back to his real life, leaving me standing in the gravel with the taste of his name on my tongue. My throat tightened, a fist of humiliation clenching inside my chest. I had let him in. I had let him see the cracks in the walls, and he just used them to get a better view before walking away. I pulled on my work clothes, the rough denim and thick wool of familiar armor. My hands felt clumsy, my fingers stiff as I laced my boots. Every movement was deliberate, mechanical. I would not feel this. I would go to the distillery, and I would work. The copper stills didn't care about broken promises. The barley didn't judge you for being an idiot. They were honest. They were real. The distillery was quiet when I arrived, the air cool and thick with the sweet, malty breath of sleeping whiskey. I didn't turn on all the lights, preferring the shadows. I walked the floor, my hand trailing over a fermentation tank, its steel skin cool and solid beneath my palm. This was my world, a world of temperatures and timings, of yeast and grain and patience, a world Ewan Fox was only ever visiting. The partnership we'd built, the easy back and forth, the shared laughter over a stuck valve, it all felt like a lie now, a story he was crafting, and I, like the biggest bloody fool in all of Scotland, had started to believe it. I was checking the pressure on the boiler when he came in. He looked tired, his hair slightly less perfect than usual, a faint shadow of a beard along his jaw. He'd swapped the cashmere for a plain gray sweatshirt, but it still managed to look more expensive than my entire wardrobe. "Morning," he said, his voice quiet. I didn't look up from the gauge. Boiler's holding steady at 1.2 bar. A beat of silence. "Right, good. Jamie, about last night. I'm heading to the mash tun," I cut in, turning away before he could see the flicker in my eyes. "Need to check the conversion. Don't want any starch slippage." I felt his gaze on my back as I walked away, a physical weight. I expected him to leave it, to take the hint and retreat to his laptop and his spreadsheets. Of course, he didn't. His footsteps followed me across the concrete floor. That call, he started again, catching up to me as I climbed the metal steps to the tun's platform. "It wasn't what you think." I leaned over the railing, peering into the steaming, porridge-like mixture below. The sweet, earthy smell filled my lungs. It was grounding. It was constant. Temperatures holding at 64 degrees. Perfect. I made a note on the clipboard, my knuckles white where I gripped the pen. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a wild, panic beat that felt utterly out of place in the calm rhythm of the distillery. "Will you stop?" His voice was sharp with frustration. He was standing at the bottom of the steps looking up at me. "Will you just stop for 1 second and listen to me?" Something inside me, something raw and wounded, snapped. I turned, my face a mask of cold professionalism. I let my eyes sweep over him, from his designer trainers to his artfully messy hair. I made him a stranger. I made him a client,
Jamie, can we talk about... The final proofing is at 46.8%. My voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. Is that an acceptable data point for your narrative, or do you need me to round up? The words hung in the air between us, ugly and sharp. Ewan flinched as if I'd slapped him. The frustration on his face dissolved, replaced by a quiet, shuttered look I couldn't decipher. He just stared at me, his honey-colored eyes wide with a hurt that mirrored the ache in my own chest. It was a low blow, and we both knew it. I had taken the one thing that was ours, this ridiculous fake story, and turned it into a weapon to push him away. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He didn't try again. 46.8 is fine, he said, his voice barely a whisper. He turned and walked back toward the small office we'd been sharing. His shoulders slumped. The rest of the day was a wasteland of silence. The space between us, which had been filled with jokes and arguments and the low hum of possibility, was now a dead, echoing quiet. We moved around each other like ghosts, our conversations reduced to curt, necessary exchanges about flow rates and cask numbers. The easy partnership was shattered. I had taken a hammer to it myself, and the victory felt exactly like defeat. My walls were back up, higher and thicker than ever, and it was damn lonely inside. By late afternoon, the strain was a physical thing, a tension headache pounding behind my eyes. We were on the bottling line, getting a small preliminary run ready for the festival judges. The clatter and whir of the machinery was a mercy, filling the space our words would not. Bottles marched along the conveyor belt, getting rinsed, filled with amber liquid, corked, and labeled. It was a hypnotic, comforting process. Forward momentum, progress. I was monitoring the labeler, adjusting the tension on the spool when the sound began. It started as a low groan, a sick, grinding noise from the heart of the line. I froze, my head snapping up. Ewan heard it too, his face paling. The rhythmic clinking of glass faltered. The groan became a high-pitched shriek of tortured metal. Then a loud crack, sharp and final as a gunshot. The entire line shuddered violently. The conveyor belt jerked to a stop, sending a dozen empty bottles tumbling to the floor, where they smashed in a shower of glittering shards. A plume of acrid blue-gray smoke puffed from the main drive motor housing, the smell of burnt wiring and ozone stinging my nostrils. And then, silence. A profound, deafening silence, broken only by the slow, sad drip of whiskey from a fallen filler nozzle onto the concrete floor. Drip, drip, drip. Each drop sounded like a nail being hammered into our coffin. We both stood frozen, staring at the dead machine, the bottling line, our only way to get our whiskey into bottles for the festival, for the bank, for our one and only chance. It wasn't just a piece of equipment. It was our lifeline, and it was broken. My gaze lifted from the smoking motor and met Ewan's across the wreckage. The anger, the hurt, the suffocating silence of the past 8 hours, it all evaporated, burned away by a new, much colder emotion. Sheer, unadulterated panic. The bank was at the gates, the festival was days away, and we were completely and utterly screwed.
Chapter 15. We're standing in the ruins of something that was just starting to feel like home. The acrid smell of burnt-out motor hangs in the air, a funeral pyre for Auld Brose. My heart hammers against my ribs, each frantic beat a nail in the distillery's coffin. Jamie's face is a mask of gray stone, his shoulders slumped as he stares at the mangled bottling line. Every bit of momentum we'd built, the late nights, the shared laughter, the quiet understanding that had started to bloom between us, it's all gone, vanished in a puff of smoke. "I'll fix it," I say, the words tasting like ash. My voice sounds thin, a stranger's. Jamie doesn't even look at me. He just nudges a piece of blackened metal with the toe of his boot. With what? A magic wand from Glasgow? The barb hits its mark, sharp and cold. He's right. I'm useless here. I can taste the difference between a 24-and-a-half-year-old single malt and a 25, but I can't tell a piston from a spark plug. My hands, so deft when swirling a glass, are clumsy and clean. Useless. A wave of nausea rolls through me. This isn't just about the distillery failing. It's about Gran's face, the hope in her eyes dimming. It's about the whole town, their livelihoods tied to this place. And it's about Jamie. Seeing him defeated, seeing the wall go back up between us, brick by painful brick, it's a physical ache in my chest. Everything is slipping through my fingers. The life I was just starting to dare to imagine. Here, with him. Gone. No, I say, my voice firmer now, fueled by a rising tide of desperation. With my phone. I pull it out, my fingers fumbling on the cool glass. I'm a sommelier, a connector. My world is a web of contacts, of favors owed and deals made. It's the one thing I'm good at. I start dialing, pacing the cold concrete floor of the bottling hall. First, a supplier in Edinburgh. Ewan, lad, good to hear from you. A G-series motor for a bottling line? Antique, that. Let me see. Aye, I can get one. From Italy. Take 2 weeks. Minimum. 2 weeks. My throat tightens. We don't have 2 weeks. We have days. A sympathetic grunt. Sorry, son, can't help you. I hang up, my pulse thrumming in my ears. I try another number. A specialist engineering firm in London I once sourced vintage wine fridges from. The answer is the same. They can source it, yes, eventually. But not now. Not in time. With every call, the knot in my stomach twists tighter. I'm a fraud, the slick city boy with all the answers, who can't even do the one thing he promised. The hope drains out of me, leaving behind a cold, heavy dread. Jamie hasn't moved. He's just watching me, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. The silence between us is heavy, suffocating. It follows us back to the gatehouse that night, settling over the small space like a shroud. I build a fire, the crackle and spit of the logs doing nothing to warm the chill in the room. Jamie sits at the small table, staring into a mug of tea as if it holds the secrets to the universe. I can't stand it. The quiet is louder than any argument. We'll find a way, I say, my voice rough. He gives a short, humorless laugh. There is no way, Ewan. It's over. I'm not giving up. Why? He finally looks at me, and his eyes are bleak. So you can have a good story to tell back in the city? The time I slummed it in the Highlands and tried to save a failing distillery? The injustice of it stings. Is that what you think this is? I don't know what to think. My own frustration, my own fear, boils over. I take a step towards him, my hands clenched at my sides. What happened? 1 minute we were working. We were a team, and the next you're looking at me like I'm a stranger again. He pushes back from the table, his chair scraping against the floorboards. The mug clatters as he sets it down, his knuckles white. I heard you. Heard me? What are you talking about? On the phone. His voice finally cracks, the raw emotion he's been bottling up all day exploding out of him. This afternoon, before the motor blew, you were talking to someone. Your boss? I try to backtrack, to think. I made a dozen calls. Probably. I was trying to. London sounds incredible. He spits the words back at me, a perfect, bitter mimicry of my own voice. The tone I use for clients, for my other life. Don't you dare stand there and pretend this was ever anything more than a Kilt trip for you before you swan off back to your real life. The accusation hangs in the air, raw and painful, and so far from the truth it steals my breath. He heard me talking to Charles about the potential promotion, the move to London. He heard the ambition, the part of me that is still Ewan Fox, the Glasgow sommelier. He didn't hear the rest of it. He didn't hear the conflict in my voice, the hesitation. He didn't hear the part of my heart that was already taking root here in the damp soil of Glen Cailleach. Jamie, that's not, I start, trying to find the words to explain, to bridge the chasm that has just ripped open between us. You don't understand. But he's not listening. His face is a shuttered mask. He turns, grabs his worn jacket from the hook by the door, and shoves his arms into it with violent force. I can't do this. The 3 words land like punches. He wrenches the door open, letting in a blast of cold, damp air that smells of rain and endings. And then he's gone. The door clicks shut behind him, leaving me alone in the suffocating silence of the gatehouse.
Chapter 16. The Piper's Rest was warm and bright, but all I felt was the cold seeping back into my bones. The cheerful noise of a Friday night, laughter, the clatter of glasses, the low thrum of the jukebox, was a wall of sound I couldn't seem to break through. It all felt a mile away. My own world had shrunk to the size of the knot in my stomach. I pushed through the crowd, my shoulders hunched, ignoring the odd greeting. My boots felt heavy as lead. I just needed to get to the bar, to Theo. She saw me before I saw her, her sharp eyes missing nothing from behind the bar she commanded like a ship's captain. She was pulling a pint of heavy, her dark hair tied back in a messy knot, and her expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of something in her gaze. She finished the pour, set the glass down for a regular, and moved toward my end of the bar, wiping the polished wood with a cloth. Jamie. She didn't ask. She just stated my name, her voice low and even. I leaned my elbows on the bar, the sticky residue of spilled beer a distant, unimportant sensation under my forearms. I couldn't seem to make my mouth work. The words were stones I couldn't spit out. Theo's eyes scanned my face. You look like you've been wrestling a badger and lost. She reached for a glass, her movements economical and sure, and pulled a small measure of amber liquid from the top shelf. Auld Brose. She slid it in front of me. On the house. I stared at the whiskey. The smell of it, our smell, the one I lived and breathed every day, made my throat tighten. He's leaving. The words came out rough, scraped raw. Theo leaned closer, her voice dropping so only I could hear it over the pub's happy din. Who's leaving? Ewan. His name tasted like ash. He's got a job in London, some fancy wine cellar that needs a head of acquisition. The ridiculous title felt sour and foreign on my tongue. I'd wanted to laugh when I heard it, a bitter, ugly sound. Now I just felt sick. She didn't say anything, just watched me, letting the silence stretch, letting me fill it. I heard him on the phone, I said, the memory replaying itself sharp and cruel, the smooth, confident tone of Ewan's voice, the way he'd stood silhouetted against the window, already a world away from me, from the gatehouse, from Glen Cailleach. He was talking about contracts, start dates, sounded bloody ecstatic. I picked up the glass, the weight of it solid in my shaking hand. My heart hammered against my ribs, a dull, frantic beat. We'd just kissed, Theo. The admission was a hot spike of shame. It had felt like the world tilting on its axis, like everything was finally slotting into place, solid, real. And then I'd heard that phone call, and the ground had vanished from beneath my feet. It was all fake, I mumbled into the glass, the fumes stinging my eyes. The whole thing, the romance for the festival. I knew that, but the kiss. I broke off, unable to finish. I thought it was for us. I downed the whiskey in one go. It burned a trail all the way down to the pit of my stomach, a fire that did nothing to warm the ice lodged there. So I told him I couldn't do it anymore, the whole charade. I slammed the glass down on the bar, harder than I meant to. A few heads turned our way. Theo just stared at me, her expression unreadable. I walked out. She took my empty glass, her movements deliberate. She polished it with her cloth, holding it up to the light, inspecting it for smears. The pub noise swelled, and then faded into a background hum. Right, she said finally, setting the clean glass down. Let me get this straight. She leaned on the bar, her gaze pinning me in place. You and Ewan are pretending to be a couple, to save the distillery. You kissed him. It felt real. Then you overheard a fragment of a phone call you weren't supposed to hear, decided you knew exactly what it meant, without asking a single question, and blew the whole thing to smithereens by storming out like a child. Every word was a small, sharp slap. My jaw tightened. It wasn't a fragment. I heard what I heard. Did you? Theo's eyebrow arched. Did you hear the whole conversation? Did you hear who he was talking to? Did you hear him say, "Yes, I accept this job and will be leaving Glen Cailleach forever," to trample on Jamie MacLeod's heart? Don't be ridiculous. I'm not the one being ridiculous. Her voice was still quiet, but it had an edge like sharpened steel. So you heard 10 seconds of a phone call and decided to blow up your entire life? For a stubborn man, you give up awful easy. Jamie MacLeod. The truth in her words was a gut punch. I flinched. The anger I'd been nursing all the way from the gatehouse sputtered out, replaced by a hollow, ringing shame. Give up. The words echoed in the sudden quiet of my head. I didn't give up. I fixed things. I stayed. That was the whole point of me. He's always left, I said, the defense weak even to my own ears. It's what he does. And you've always expected him to, she shot back. You've been waiting for it, haven't you? Looking for the first sign of it so you could prove yourself right. So you could be the one left behind again. Because that's a sight easier than trusting that someone might actually want to stay. I looked down at my hands on the bar. Calloused, stained with grease, capable of fixing a broken copper coil or coaxing a temperamental boiler back to life. But I'd just broken the most delicate, important thing I'd held in a decade, and I'd done it with nothing but assumptions and fear. Theo was right. I hadn't even tried to fix it. I'd just run, just like I always accused him of doing. The nausea churned. I had looked at his face, seen the confusion and the hurt there before it shuddered, and I had walked away. I had put that look on his face. The pump, I said, my voice thick. The circulation pump for the wash still. It's finally gone. Proper knackered. That's why he was on the phone, to find a part. He hadn't been looking for an escape route. He had been trying to help. He had been fighting for the distillery. For me. Theo nodded slowly, her expression softening from sharp accusation to something like pity. I figured it was something like that. You are, she agreed, but without malice. But you're a workable idiot. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I had no answer. Apologizing felt like trying to glue a shattered pot back together. The pieces would never fit right again. And the pump was still broken. The festival was still looming. Everything was still a complete mess. Only now the mess was entirely my fault. Theo was quiet for a long moment, tapping a thoughtful rhythm on the bar. Old man Hemlock, she said suddenly, over in Aberlour. Remember him? Used to have that garage on the edge of town. Retired years ago. I looked up, confused by the sudden change of topic. Vaguely, what about him? He could fix anything, Theo said, a glint in her eye. Anything with a motor, a gear, a wire. My dad used to say he could coax a tractor back to life with a stern look and a bit of twine. He keeps a workshop at his cottage, full of all sorts of ancient junk. It was a long shot, a ridiculous shot, a retired mechanic in the next village over, but it was more than I'd had a minute ago. It was a step, a thing to do, a way to start fixing. Theo leaned forward again, her gaze intense. The pump is one thing, Jamie. That's metal and oil, easy. But this thing with Ewan, that's the real breakdown, isn't it? She held my gaze, her own unwavering. Are you going to fight for the distillery, she asked, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Are you going to fight for him? I looked from her searching face down to my own two hands. They were strong, they were capable, they were made for building and repairing, not for letting things fall to ruin. I pushed myself off the bar stool, the legs scraping against the floorboards. The sounds of the pub rushed back in, but they weren't a wall anymore. They were just noise. I looked at Theo, gave her a single sharp nod. Then I turned and left the warmth of the pub, my boots hitting the pavement with a purpose that hadn't been there an hour before.
Chapter 17. There were two paths laid out before me. One led to a boarding pass, the scent of jet fuel, and a corner office overlooking the Thames. The other smelled like damp earth and possibility, a future as uncertain and wild as the Highlands themselves. My suitcase sat open on the bed, a gaping mouth waiting to be fed my cashmere jumpers and my crisp city-creased shirts, ready to swallow the last few weeks whole and leave nothing but a memory. My chest was a cage, my heart a frantic bird beating against the bars. Jamie's words from yesterday echoed in the room, sharp and cruel. This isn't your home anymore. He'd aimed to hurt, and he'd hit the bullseye. The ache was a physical thing, a deep, resonant thrum beneath my ribs. I'd spent a decade building a life that couldn't be touched by the messy, unpredictable emotions of this place. One argument, one look from him, and the entire structure had come crashing down. I sank onto the edge of the mattress, the springs groaning in protest. My phone felt heavy in my hand. Marcus, my boss, had left 2 messages. The London offer wasn't going to wait forever. My thumb hovered over his contact photo, a slick, smiling man in a suit as sharp as his ambition. This was it, the moment of decision. I could press the button, accept the promotion, and this whole painful, peaty interlude would become an anecdote I'd tell over expensive wine. Yes, I went back to my tiny hometown for a bit, terribly quaint. Now, about that quarterly projection, the thought turned my stomach. My finger moved, scrolling past Marcus, past the alerts from wine blogs and Glasgow restaurants. I stopped on a picture of Gran, a selfie she'd accidentally taken, where you could only see her chin and one laughing eye. My throat closed up. I pressed call on Marcus's number before I could lose my nerve. He answered on the second ring, his voice booming with false bonhomie. "Fox, just the man. I trust you're enjoying your rustic retreat?" "Marcus," I said, my own voice sounding thin and distant. "I need more time." A pause. The bonhomie evaporated. "Time? Ewan, this isn't a bottle of Bordeaux we're laying down for a decade. This is a career-defining opportunity. It's now. I understand that." I stood up, pacing the small room. My reflection in the wardrobe mirror was a ghost, pale, haunted. "Something's come up with the family business. The Speyside Whiskey Festival is at the end of the week. I need until after that." He let out an exasperated sigh, a sound like air leaking from a tire. "The festival? Don't tell me you're getting sentimental about moonshine, Ewan. That's not who we are." "Who are we?" I looked at the open suitcase, at the life I'd so carefully curated folded inside. It felt like a costume. A very expensive, well-made costume for a part I wasn't sure I wanted to play anymore. "Just until the end of the week, Marcus. That's all I'm asking." The silence stretched. I could picture him pinching the bridge of his nose, weighing my value against the inconvenience. Finally, he spoke. His voice clipped. "Fine, until the end of the festival. But then I need an answer, Ewan. A firm one." "You'll have it," I promised, and ended the call. I didn't feel relief. I felt a terrifying, exhilarating lightness, like a man who's just stepped off a cliff and is waiting to find out if he can fly. The room was too small, the silence too loud. I couldn't pack. I couldn't sit still. I found myself walking back to the distillery, the crunch of gravel under my boots, a familiar rhythm. The air was cool and thick with the smell of rain-soaked peat. Inside, the great copper stills were cold and quiet, sleeping giants. My gaze fell on the cardboard box I'd pulled from the archives a week ago, the one full of old marketing pamphlets and faded invoices. On a whim, I lifted the lid. This time, I wasn't looking for a strategy. I wasn't looking for anything. I just let my fingers drift through the papers. Beneath a stack of brittle order forms, my hand brushed against the corner of a leather-bound album. I pulled it out. It was heavy, the cover worn smooth at the edges. I opened it on the dusty surface of my grandfather's old desk. The first photo made my breath catch. My grandparents, standing in this very spot, their arms around each other. Gran was beautiful, her hair dark, a mischievous smile playing on her lips. Granddad looked impossibly young, proud, a smudge of soot on his cheek, just like the one Jamie always seemed to have. They weren't just the old people from my memory. They were vibrant, full of life and love, the distillery humming around them like a physical extension of their hearts. I turned the page. More photos. A town Cailleach, a distillery staff beaming, raising glasses of golden whiskey. Then I saw a man with Jamie's broad shoulders and kind eyes, his arms slung around a younger version of my grandfather, Jamie's dad. My heart gave a painful lurch, and then I found it. A small, square photograph. The colors faded to sepia and blue. It was Jamie's father, kneeling on the distillery floor. Perched on his shoulders was a little boy with a riot of reddish-brown hair and a grin that took up half his face. He was holding a toy wrench, his small hand resting on his father's head. Tiny Jamie. They were both looking at the camera, their expressions identical, pure, unfiltered joy. Behind them, the stills gleamed. Something in my chest cracked open. It wasn't just a business. It was never just a business. It was a legacy built not of copper and barley, but of moments like this, of a father and a son, of pride and love, of a joy so profound it was soaked into the very floorboards. Like terroir, the unique soul of a place that gives a wine its character. This was the terroir of Auld Brose. It was the laughter, the arguments, the love, the loss. It was Jamie's entire world. I finally understood. His anger, his stubbornness, his refusal to let this place die. It wasn't about him being difficult. It was about him guarding a history that was written in his blood. He wasn't pushing me away from a business. He was protecting his heart. My want, the shiny London career, the accolades, the prestige had been a wall between us. My need, a thing I hadn't even let myself name, was a place to belong, a person to come home to. And I saw with blinding clarity that they weren't two different paths anymore. They had converged right here, in this messy, beautiful, broken-down distillery. My city armor, so carefully polished and maintained, simply fell away. It didn't shatter, it just dissolved, leaving me standing there, utterly exposed, and feeling more myself than I had in a decade. A profound quiet settled in my soul. The heavy distillery door scraped open, jolting me from the past. Jamie stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the gray afternoon light. He was covered in grease from his elbows to his hairline, his jumper stained, his hair a mess. He looked exhausted. He looked magnificent. He walked towards me, his boots loud on the concrete floor. He didn't look at the photo album, didn't look at the desk. His gaze was fixed on my face, and for the first time in days, his expression was utterly, breathtakingly clear. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. There was just a quiet intensity, a focus that pinned me in place. He stopped a few feet away and held up his hand. In his palm rested a small, intricate piece of metal, newly machined and gleaming under the weak light. It was a perfect tiny work of art. "Found him," Jamie said, his voice rough. "The old mechanic who used to work for my dad. He still had the schematics." He closed his fingers around the part. "It's fixed." My throat was too tight to speak. I just nodded, my eyes stinging. Jamie's gaze held mine, a silent question and its answer passing between us. The space that had yawned like a chasm was gone. He took a breath, the first easy one I'd seen him take all week. Chapter 18. The air in the festival hall was a physical thing. It was a wall of noise, of perfume and aftershave, trying and failing to mask the glorious, cloying scent of 1,000 whiskies breathing in one room. A tide of tweed and ambition washed around us, men with booming laughs and sharp suits sizing each other up. It was a language I understood intimately, the posturing, the branding, the silent war waged in the clinking of glasses. My world, only it wasn't. Not anymore. Our stand was laughably small, tucked between a behemoth from Islay with a backdrop like a Hollywood set, and a slick space-eyed giant handing out engraved tasting glasses. We were an island. A tiny, defiant embassy from a forgotten kingdom. We had a trestle table, a tartan runner Gran had insisted on, and a single spotlight angled down onto our salvation. The gatehouse. I ran my thumb over the embossed paper of the label I'd designed a lifetime ago, back in my Glasgow flat. The illustration of the old stone archway, the clean lines of the font. It looked real. It looked expensive. It looked like it belonged. I'd seen bottles with less pedigree command 3-figure price tags in the city. Seeing it here, a product of soot and panic and Jamie's stubborn hands, made a lump form in my throat. It was beautiful. "It'll do," Jamie muttered, his eyes scanning the crowd. He was wearing his good kilt, the dark green and navy of his family tartan, and a charcoal gray shirt that made his shoulders seem even broader. He looked like a chieftain surveying a battlefield, untamed, unbreakable, entirely out of place, and yet the most grounded person in the whole building. We didn't have time to talk. We barely had time to breathe. The last of the special edition, the 50 bottles we'd reserved for the judges and the most discerning of buyers, still needed to be finished. The new part for the bottling line had worked, but it was slow, the ancient mechanics groaning in protest. So we'd brought the rest with us. We fell into a rhythm without a word. It was a dance of practiced efficiency. I'd take a bottle, wipe it down until it gleamed, then pass it to Jamie. He'd fill it with a steady hand, the amber liquid catching the light, then press the cork home with a satisfying thud. My job was the final touch. I dip the neck into a small pot of molten black wax, then stamp our Auld Brose seal into it before the wax could fully harden. Fill, cork, seal. The world narrowed to the space between our hands. The roar of the festival faded into a dull drone. There was only the glint of glass, the scent of malt and hot wax, and the quiet sounds of our shared work. His knuckles brushed mine as he passed me a bottle. My heart gave a stupid, frantic kick against my ribs. We hadn't spoken about London. We hadn't spoken about anything other than mash tuns and angel's shares and the precise temperature for a perfect wax seal. We were a team. The thought landed with the weight of an anchor. For the past week, we'd been partners in this single desperate goal, and it had felt more real, more vital, than any perfectly curated tasting I'd ever hosted. When the last bottle was sealed and standing in a proud dark row, a strange quiet fell over our little island. There was nothing left to do but wait. My stomach, which had been a solid knot of adrenaline, began to churn with a more familiar, sickening anxiety. I smoothed the front of my cashmere jumper for the 10th time. It felt like a costume, like I was an actor playing the part of a man who belonged here. Jamie leaned against the table, his arms crossed over his chest. His gaze wasn't on the crowd anymore. It was on me. That intense, unnerving stare that always felt like it was stripping away the bespoke suit and the witty comebacks, leaving me standing there, 17 and terrified all over again. "You're 1,000 miles away, Fox," he said, his voice low. I forced a smile that felt brittle. "Just calculating our odds. There, Slim. We're here, that's not Slim." My heart was beating a frantic rhythm against the back of my throat. I could feel the pull of my other life, the one I had built so carefully. The offer from the London hotel sat in my inbox, a gleaming promise of success. It was everything I'd ever worked for, the peak of the mountain. So why did the thought of it feel like stepping off a cliff? Just as I was about to deflect with some polished piece of nonsense, Jamie pushed off the table. He took a step closer, closing the space between us, until I could feel the heat coming off him. My breath hitched. He reached out and grabbed my arm. His grip wasn't rough, just firm, grounding. His thumb rested on the frantic pulse point of my wrist. Ewan. He never used my first name. It was always Fox. Hearing my own name in his mouth, in that rough brogue, sent a tremor straight through me. I looked up, meeting his eyes. They were dark, with something I couldn't read. "Whatever happens in there," he said, nodding towards the closed doors of the judging room. "With them," he took a breath. "And whatever you decide about London." My stomach plunged. He knew. Of course he knew. "Thank you," he said, the words quiet but clear over the din. "For this." It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a plea. It was absolution. He was giving me an out. He was acknowledging everything I'd done, and simultaneously releasing me from any obligation to stay. It was the most generous, most painful thing anyone had ever done for me. He was thanking me for helping him save his home, so that I could feel free to leave mine behind for good. The rope I hadn't even realized was strung taut between London and Glen Cailleach, between the man I was supposed to be and the man I was standing next to, suddenly went slack. And the feeling wasn't relief. It was nausea, a dizzying, terrifying freefall. My throat was too tight to form words. I just stared at him, my carefully constructed composure shattering like cheap glass. I wanted to tell him that London felt like a ghost limb. I wanted to tell him that standing here bottling whiskey with him felt more like winning than any promotion ever could. I wanted to tell him not to let me go. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out, and then a voice, amplified by a microphone, cut through the air. "Will the representatives from the Auld Brose distillery please make their way to the stage?" Jamie's hand dropped from my arm, the loss of contact leaving my skin cold. He gave me a short, sharp nod, his expression set like granite. A united front. "It's time," he said. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild drumbeat of panic, and something else. Something that felt dangerously like hope. I took a breath, the air thick with whiskey and our unsaid words, and walked with him towards the stage. Chapter 19. Ewan I stepped up to the microphone. The story I rehearsed turning to dust in my mouth. The polished wood of the lectern felt slick beneath my damp palms. Out in the audience, a sea of shadowed faces tilted up, expectant. The three judges sat at a long table directly in front of the stage, their expressions carefully neutral, pens poised over notebooks. Beside me, Jamie stood as still as a standing stone, his presence a solid, grounding weight. He smelled of peat and rain-soaked earth, a stark contrast to the sterile, air-conditioned scent of the conference hall. My heart hammered a frantic, off-key rhythm against my ribs. I had the speech memorized. A story of heritage, of a legacy brand being revitalized for a modern palate. It was good, it was slick, it was exactly what a panel of investors would want to hear. It was also a complete and utter lie. I cleared my throat, the sound swallowed by the vast, silent room. Good afternoon, my name is Ewan Fox, and for the past decade, my world has been about stories. The words came out smooth, practiced, the sommelier voice. The one I used to sell a 500-pound bottle of Burgundy by talking about the slope of the hill and the quality of the sunlight. Every bottle of wine, every glass of whiskey, has a narrative. It's a story of time and weather and the hands that made it. The story we're here to tell you today is about Auld Brose distillery. I was doing it. The words flowed. I spoke of market positioning and target demographics, of leveraging a vintage brand identity for a new generation of discerning consumers. It was a beautiful narrative, crafted as carefully as a bespoke suit, and it felt like a costume I was suffocating in. My gaze drifted over the judges. One of them, a woman with severe silver hair, tapped her pen against her notepad, bored. Another stifled a yawn. They'd heard this speech 100 times before, just with different names and places swapped in. They were looking for a story, and I was giving them an advertisement. Then I made the mistake of looking at Jamie. He wasn't watching the judges. He was watching me. His blue eyes, usually stormy or shuttered, were wide and clear under the stage lights. There was no judgment in them, just a quiet, unwavering attention. He had a smudge of what looked like soot high on his cheekbone, a detail so profoundly Jamie that it cracked the polished shell of my composure right down the middle. He was real. The peeling paint on the distillery walls was real. The scent of the mash tun, the burn of new-make spirit on the tongue, the ache in my back after a day of hauling barrels, that was all real. This speech, this slick city performance, was the only fake thing on this stage. The rehearsed words caught in my throat. My perfect narrative dissolved. Panic, cold and sharp, seized my lungs, becoming thin and brittle. I saw a flicker of concern cross Jamie's face. He gave a minute, almost imperceptible shake of his head, as if trying to get me back on track. But I couldn't. It wasn't in me. I took a shaky breath and leaned closer to the microphone. "That's the story I was supposed to tell you," I said, my voice suddenly raw, stripped of its professional sheen. A murmur went through the crowd. The judge with the silver hair stopped tapping her pen. "It's a good story. It just isn't the true one." My heart was trying to climb out of my throat. This was professional suicide, setting fire to my one chance, to Gran's one chance, right here on the stage. But I couldn't stop. The truth is I ran away from Glen Cailleach. I ran away from this distillery the first chance I got. I didn't look at Jamie. Couldn't bear to. I thought it was a relic, a piece of my past I needed to shed to become this. I gestured vaguely at my expensive jumper, my city haircut. Someone sophisticated. Someone who knew the difference between a premier crew and a grand crew, but who'd forgotten the smell of his own home. I curated my life like a wine cellar, everything in its right place, perfectly temperature-controlled and sealed away from the messiness of the real world. The room was utterly still now. I could feel every single person leaning forward. Coming back wasn't part of the plan, and Auld Brose, it wasn't some vintage brand identity to be leveraged. It was failing. It was my grandmother's heart, breaking. It was the town's pulse slowing down. And it was him. My gaze finally, inevitably found Jamie's. He was staring at me, his expression unreadable, carved from Highland granite. It was our master distiller, Jamie MacLeod, holding it all together with sheer force of will, and I'm fairly certain, a bit of twine. He's the one who knows this place isn't a story. It's peat and barley and copper. It's generations of stubborn, brilliant people who knew how to turn water and grain into magic. I came back thinking I could save it with spreadsheets and marketing jargon. I was an idiot. A small, choked sound escaped me, half laugh, half sob. Jamie was the one who reminded me what authenticity actually is. It's not a selling point. It's the truth, neat, uncut. It's knowing where you come from. We fought, constantly, because he represents everything I ran from, and I represent everything he, rightly, mistrusts. He is tradition. I don't know what I am, a failed attempt at innovation, maybe. I risked a glance at him. He hadn't moved a muscle, but his throat worked as he swallowed. But this whiskey, I continued, my voice gaining strength, finding its purpose. This blend we created, it isn't old versus new. It's both. It's his deep, unshakable knowledge of the spirit, of the casks, of the way time and wood work their alchemy. And it's my palate, my understanding of balance and finish, and how to find the grace note in the chord. It's his heritage and my return. It is the best of the old world and the best of the new, blended together to make something stronger than either one could be on its own. I picked up my own glass from the lectern, my hand trembling just slightly. This whiskey isn't about a marketing story, I said, my eyes locked on Jamie's, the rest of the world falling away. There was no one in the room but us. It's about realizing that the thing you've been running from, I said, is the only thing that's ever felt like home. It's about heritage and innovation. It's about a second chance, I finished, my heart pounding in the ringing silence. My chest was tight, my lungs burning. I had either just saved the distillery or I had just torched it to the ground. There was no in between. Then, one of the judges, the silver-haired woman, slowly picked up her own glass. She raised it, her eyes meeting mine over the rim. To second chances, she said, her voice clear and carrying in the quiet hall. A beat, two, and then the room erupted, not polite clapping, but a wave of genuine, thunderous applause. It washed over the stage, over me, so loud it was a physical force. People were getting to their feet. The other judges were beaming, raising their own glasses. But I barely heard it. I could only see Jamie. He was just staring at me, the applause and the shouting and the sudden glare of flashing cameras all fading into a distant roar. His blue eyes, under the bright hot lights, were shining.
Chapter 20. The world dissolved into noise, a physical thing, a wave that slammed into the stage and washed right over me. So loud my bones vibrated with it. People were on their feet, a forest of them, their faces a blur of open-mouthed shouts and wild grins. Cameras flashed, turning the whole tent into a strobing, disorienting chaos. One of the judges clapped me on the shoulder so hard I nearly stumbled. I didn't feel it. I didn't hear him. I saw only one thing. Ewan. He stood in the center of it all, lit up like a saint in a stained glass window, the microphone still loose in his hand, and he was looking at me, just me. The whole world could have caught fire, and I wouldn't have noticed. His dark honey eyes were shining, and in them I saw everything he'd just said. Not the words about the peat and the water and the angel's share. The other words, the ones about coming home. My heart wasn't just beating. It was a wild, frantic thing, a trapped bird throwing itself against my ribs, desperate to get out. He'd done it. The clever, ridiculous city slicker bastard had done it. He hadn't just saved the distillery. He'd saved me. Then the wave broke. A tide of bodies swarmed the stage. Well-wishers, reporters, other distillers. They swallowed him up. 1 second he was there, the fixed point in my spinning universe, and the next he was gone, submerged in a sea of tweed and congratulations. A raw panic clawed at my throat. No, not now. Jamie, lad, bloody brilliant. Someone I vaguely recognized from the McIntyre estate was pumping my hand, his face ruddy with excitement. I mumbled something, my eyes scanning the churning crowd. I saw a flash of his dark hair, the expensive cut a stark contrast to the rough-spun room. I started pushing my way through, shouldering past people, ignoring the hands reaching for me. Sorry, excuse me, got to. The air was thick and hot, smelling of sweat, spilled whiskey, and victory. It felt like being inside the mash tun, a churning, steaming mess. I needed air. I needed him. I finally broke through the inner circle, and there he was, looking overwhelmed, a tight, polite smile plastered on his face as a journalist shoved a recorder under his nose. Our eyes met over the man's balding head. The smile on Ewan's face didn't change, but a message passed between us. Get me out of here. I didn't hesitate. I reached through the gap, my hand closing around his wrist. His skin was warm, solid, an anchor. The frantic bird in my chest settled. He's needed, I said, my voice rougher than I intended. I didn't wait for an argument, just pulled. Ewan stumbled, throwing an apologetic look over his shoulder, but he came willingly. I didn't let go. I towed him behind me, a ship pulling its precious cargo out of a storm. We navigated the obstacle course of bodies. I pushed through the heavy canvas flap at the back of the main tent, and we were out. Suddenly, it was quiet. The roar of the festival was a muffled hum on the other side of the canvas. The air was cool, damp, smelling of cut grass and diesel from a nearby generator. We stood on a patch of muddy ground behind the catering tents, surrounded by empty crates and coiled hoses. It was grubby and real and perfect. I let go of his wrist, and the absence of his touch was immediate. He stood there, looking a little dazed, his perfectly styled hair now slightly ruffled. The stage lights were gone, replaced by the soft gray of a late Scottish afternoon. He looked younger, more like the boy I remembered, less like the man I was still getting to know. My throat felt tight as a bung hammered into a cask. All the words I wanted to say, all the things I'd been holding back for weeks, for years, were fermenting inside me, threatening to spill over. I had to be sure. I had to know. I took a step closer, my boots squelching in the mud. He didn't move. I reached up and framed his face with my hands. My palms were rough, calloused from work. His skin was smooth. I could feel the faint tremor running through him, or maybe that was me. Was any of that for the judges? My voice was barely a whisper. All the showmanship, the story Gran had concocted, the romance we were supposed to be selling. I needed to know what was real. Ewan's eyes searched mine. He leaned into my touch, a small, trusting movement that undid me completely. A slow smile spread across his lips, and this one wasn't for a crowd. It was crooked and genuine, and it hit me with the force of a neat dram of cask-strength whiskey, burning all the way down. No, he said, his voice soft. That was all for you. The world stopped. The muffled sounds of the festival, the thrum of the generator, the call of a distant gull, it all vanished. There was only the feeling of his cheekbones under my palms and the truth in his eyes. Relief washed through me, so potent it made me dizzy. It was the release of a pressure I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The pressure of 10 years of silence, of misunderstanding, of longing for something I thought I'd lost forever. And then I was kissing him. It wasn't gentle. It was a crash, a collision. It was 10 years of missed chances and unspoken words poured into one moment. It was the smoky, peaty taste of the winning dram on his lips mixed with something that was just Ewan. It was relief and desperation, and a joy so fierce it felt like it could power the whole distillery for a year. His hands came up to grip my arms, holding on tight as I kissed him like he was the air I'd been denied. When I finally pulled back, we were both breathless. I rested my forehead against his, our breathing loud in the sudden stillness. Good, I murmured against his lips, the word a gravelly rumble in my chest, because I'm not letting you go to London. It wasn't a question. It was a stake in the ground. He belonged here, with me. A laugh bubbled out of him, a sound of pure, unadulterated happiness. It was the best thing I'd ever heard. Wouldn't dream of it, he whispered, and then he was the one kissing me. A slow, sure kiss that tasted of promise, a kiss that tasted like home.
Chapter 21. 6 months later, home tasted like sweet malt, rain on old stone, and Jamie's kiss. It was a complex profile, one I'd spent a lifetime trying to decode without ever realizing I already held the tasting notes. Now the knowledge of it settled in my bones, as deep and certain as the bedrock beneath the distillery. I ended the call with the distributor from Edinburgh, a man whose voice had started out 6 months ago, dripping with condescension, and was now practically syrupy with respect. "Yes, Alistair, the full shipment will be there by Friday. Of course." I leaned back in my chair, Gran's old chair, the leather worn smooth in the shape of her worry, and looked out the window. The sky was the color of a wet slate, but the drizzle only seemed to make the autumn colors of the glen burn brighter. The distillery yard, once a study in organized decay, was humming. 2 new lads from the village, brothers named Cal and Finn, were rolling casks toward the warehouse, their laughter cutting through the damp air. My life in Glasgow felt like a story about someone else. A sharp-suited stranger who measured success in Michelin stars and the hushed awe of a tasting room. That man wouldn't have been caught dead in a 400-pound cashmere jumper paired with boots caked in mud and something that looked suspiciously like sheep shit. I glanced down at my feet, and a slow smile spread across my face. It was a perfect pairing, actually, the ultimate terroir. I pushed away from the desk. The paperwork could wait. It always could. The walk from the office to the maturation warehouse was my favorite part of the day. It was a short journey, but it felt like traversing my own history. I passed the mash tun, the enormous copper vessel breathing its warm, porridgey breath into the air, the smell wrapping around me like a hug. It was the first thing I remembered loving about this place, before I learned to be ashamed of it, before I ran toward the crisp, sterile sense of the city. In the village, the Piper's Rest had given the Gatehouse, our first new single malt, the one born from Jamie's stubborn genius and my knack for a good story, pride of place on its top shelf. I'd walked in last week to see a group of German tourists ordering a round of it, their faces lit with appreciation. My chest had gone tight, with a feeling so fierce and bright, it almost hurt. It wasn't the abstract satisfaction of a good review. It was solid. It was real. It was ours. I pushed open the heavy oak door to the warehouse. The air inside was cool and sacred, thick with the scent of oak and thyme and the sleeping spirit. The angel's share, they called it, the small amount of whiskey that evaporates from the barrels each year. I used to think of it as a loss, a flaw in the system, a small sacrifice for the magic that happened inside the wood. And there he was. Jamie stood halfway down the central aisle, bathed in a dusty shaft of light from a high window. He had a glass in one hand and a dipping dog, a copper tool for pulling samples, in the other. He was staring at the liquid in his glass, his brow furrowed in the same intense concentration he wore when he was trying to fix the bottling line, or when he was listening to one of Gran's rambling stories, or when he was kissing me. My heart gave a solid, steady thump against my ribs, a single, resonant beat. 6 months ago, the sight of that furrow would have sent a jolt of anxiety through me. The Jamie MacLeod scowl, a weather system all its own. But I had learned to read him, to understand the subtle isobars of his moods. This wasn't anger or frustration. This was focus. This was passion. He was wearing his work clothes, worn jeans, and a dark green Henley that was straining just a little across his shoulders. A dusting of fine soot was smudged high on his cheekbone, and his hair, the color of autumn bracken, was a mess. He was beautiful, not in the polished, curated way I had once valued, but in a way that felt fundamental, like the mountains that ringed the glen, like the stubborn, life-giving rain. I just stood there in the shadows, watching him. I watched him raise the glass to his nose, his eyes closing as he inhaled. I watched his throat work as he took a small sip. I watched the way his mouth tensed, then softened, as he chased the flavors across his palate. He was a master at his craft. My master distiller. The words still sent a private, proprietary thrill through me. Loving him wasn't a lightning strike. It was more like the slow, patient maturation of a fine single malt. The early days had been fiery, sharp, all volatile compounds and youthful spirit. We'd clashed and sparked, tasting of old wounds and new desire. But time and patience and the quiet alchemy of simply being together had mellowed us. It had drawn out the sweetness,
the hidden depths, the long, warm finish that lingered on your tongue and made you feel whole. He must have felt my eyes on him. He stilled, his head lifting. His gaze found me in the doorway, and the last of his focused frown melted away. It was replaced by a slow, easy smile that was only for me. It hit me squarely in the chest, a warmth that spread through my limbs and made my own lips curve in response. "There you are," he said, his voice a low rumble in the cavernous space. "I'm here." My own voice was a little thick. It always was, when he looked at me like that. He beckoned me over with a jerk of his head. "Come here, Fox." I walked toward him, my muddy boots echoing softly on the concrete floor. The space between us, once a chasm of unspoken history, was now just a few feet of cool, whiskey-scented air. He didn't move until I was standing right in front of him. He smelled of oak, malt, and himself. My favorite combination. "Busy day saving the world from bad whiskey?" he asked, a teasing light in his blue eyes. "Just Edinburgh," I said, but I told them we'd consider the rest of the world next quarter. His smile widened. He held up the glass he was holding, a small measure of pale gold liquid swirling inside. "Good, because I need your palate for something more important." My eyes went from his to the glass. "A new blend?" "Something like that." He held it out to me. "Have a taste of this. I think you'll like it." I took the glass, our fingers brushing. The familiar tremor went through me, the low-voltage current that was always there between us. I lifted the glass, giving it a practiced swirl. The aroma rose to meet me. It was complex. Honey, definitely. A hint of green apple, a whisper of sea salt. But underneath it all, something else, something I couldn't quite place. It was new, but it felt familiar, like a memory on the tip of my tongue. I met his eyes over the rim of the glass. He was watching me intently, his expression unreadable. I took a sip. The spirit coated my tongue. It was gentle at first, deceptively so. Then the flavors bloomed, the sweetness of the honey, the crispness of the apple, and then a sudden, surprising burst of smoke. Not the heavy, peaty smoke of an Islay, but something lighter, sweeter, like a bonfire on a crisp autumn night. It was audacious, it was brilliant, it was all him. But there was still that other note, the one that tugged at my memory, a ghost in the machine. And then I had it. White heather, a faint, floral, almost herbal note that spoke of the hills behind the distillery. Auld Brose had never used a whisper of peat, and we'd certainly never used local botanicals. It was against 100 years of tradition. It was sacrilege. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. My throat tightened. I lowered the glass, my hand trembling just slightly. I stared at him, my mind racing, trying to form the words. "Jamie," I breathed, my voice barely audible. Chapter 22. His voice is a whisper, but it cracks through the silence of the dunnage warehouse like a whip. "What did you do?" My own breath catches in my throat. My heart, which a moment ago was hammering against my ribs, like a cooper on a fresh barrel, stutters to a complete stop. This is it, the moment of judgment. For 10 years I have been the keeper of the flame at Auld Brose, the steady hand on the tiller. I have done everything by the book, the same book my father and his father before him followed. And in one secret, desperate act, I have set that book on fire. I can't find the words. They're stuck somewhere behind the lump of sheer, unadulterated terror lodged in my throat. My hands feel huge and clumsy at my sides. All I can do is watch him, this man who blew back into my life like a storm, holding my entire future in a single glass. He stares at me, his honey-colored eyes wide, demanding an answer I don't know how to give. I start, and my voice is a rough, gravelly thing. I clear my throat and try again. "I made whiskey." A muscle jumps in his jaw. "Don't be an arse, Jamie. You know what I mean. This isn't Auld Brose. This is something else." He lifts the glass to the weak light filtering through the dusty window, swirling it again. The liquid clings to the side, thick and golden. There's peat in here. Not a lot, just a whisper. And heather. My God, is that white heather? I can only nod. My neck feels like it's made of rusted iron. He lowers the glass, his gaze intense, analytical. He's not Ewan Fox, the boy who ran away, anymore. He's Ewan Fox, the sommelier, the expert, the man whose palate is his fortune, and he's dissecting my soul one sip at a time. My knuckles are white where I'm gripping the edge of a nearby cask. It feels like the only thing keeping me upright. You broke 100 years of tradition, he says, his voice flat, unreadable. I know. You used peat smoke, in a space-side distillery famous for being unpeated. I know. You introduced a botanical. You risked tainting the stills, the washbacks, everything. Theo would have your head on a pike. I manage. A sliver of my usual defiance returning. Good thing Theo doesn't he ken, isn't it? He ignores my attempt at humor. He takes another small sip, closing his eyes. That one simple action sends a wave of nausea through me. He's committing it to memory, cataloging every flaw, every mistake. He's going to tell me it's a disaster, a monstrosity. He's going to tell me I've ruined everything. My stomach twists itself into a sailor's knot. Why did I think this was a good idea, showing him of all people? It's like a sheep showing a new shearing technique to a wolf. Then he starts talking, and the world outside this cold, damp warehouse just stops. It's the smoke, he murmurs, his eyes still closed. It's not Islay smoke, not that iodine and bonfire punch. This is gentler, softer. Hillside peat, the stuff you smell on the wind after a dry spell. He opens his eyes and pins me with them. You burned it yourself, didn't you? From the top of Glen Cailleach. I feel the blood drain from my face. How? And the heather, he continues, riding right over me. You haven't distilled it with the mash. That would be clumsy. It would turn soapy. This is an infusion. In the spirit before barreling. No, that's not right either. He brings the glass to his nose again, inhaling deeply. A faint wry smile touches his lips, the first sign of anything other than clinical analysis. The cask. You seasoned the cask. You made a heather tea, a massively concentrated one, and you seasoned the barrel with it before you put the spirit in. My jaw is on the floor. I can feel it. He's just laid out months of my secret, painstaking work in 30 seconds. He's unspooled the entire complicated process, as if he'd been standing right beside me. It's a sin against God and whiskey, what you did to that American oak, I say, the words coming out in a rush of disbelief. It's sacrilege. He lets out a short, sharp laugh that echoes in the quiet. It's not a mocking laugh. It's a laugh of pure, unadulterated delight. It's genius, Jamie. It's bloody genius. And just like that, the knot in my stomach doesn't untwist. It dissolves. Warmth floods my chest, a heady, dizzying rush like the first sip of high-proof spirit. My heart starts beating again, a steady, powerful rhythm this time. Genius. He called it genius. He takes a step closer. The air shifts, suddenly charged with more than just the scent of aging whiskey and damp earth. Now it's sandalwood and peat smoke, his scent and mine. Why didn't you tell me? He asks, his voice softer now. I shrug, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. When was I supposed to tell you? Oh, by the way, Ewan, while you've been charming festival judges and making your grand think we're madly in love, I've been committing heresy in Warehouse 4. Yes, that's exactly when you should have told me. He's gesturing with the glass now, animated. This is the story. This is the romance. Not us, you idiot. He gestures between us. This, he holds up the glass. Auld Brose has been a beautiful, perfectly preserved museum piece for 50 years. But museums don't make a profit, Ewan. They just gather dust. You took 100 years of history and you didn't throw it away. You built on it. You gave it a future. He is describing the distillery, but it feels like he's describing me. Like he's describing us. This whole fake relationship was about preserving the past, but the only thing that feels real is this crazy, unexpected thing we're building, this new flavor we're creating together. I had to do something, I say, my voice thick. We're drowning, Ewan. The numbers, they're not just bad, they're catastrophic. We needed a lifeboat. I was just throwing things in the water to see what would float. I look at the single cask sitting alone in the center of the floor, my lifeboat. I only made one. I can see the flecks of gold in his honey-brown eyes. I can see the faint scar through his left eyebrow, the one he got falling out of the old oak tree by the burn when we were 12. One is all we need, he says, his voice low and intense. One cask is a story. It's a limited edition. It's a festival exclusive that will have every whiskey blogger from here to Tokyo losing their minds. His excitement is a tangible thing. It's a current running between us, pulling me in. All my life, the distillery has been my anchor, the solid, unmoving center of my world. Ewan has always been the opposite, all motion and change, a ship sailing for distant shores. But right now, in this dusty warehouse, it feels like we finally found the same tide. "What about Gran?" I ask. "What about the traditionalists on the board? They'll think I've lost my mind." "Let them," he says, and there's a fierce protective fire in his eyes that makes my breath hitch. "Your Gran wants to save the distillery. This is how we do it. We don't give them the old, safe story they expect. We give them this. We give them the truth. The story of a master distiller who loves this place so much he was willing to break all the rules to save it." He reaches out, not to touch me, but to take my hand. He turns it over, his fingers tracing the calluses on my palm. His touch is light, but it sends a jolt straight up my arm. My pulse is a frantic drum against my skin. "This is the best whiskey I have ever tasted, Jamie MacLeod," he says, his gaze locking with mine, "and I have tasted a lot of whiskey." Then he smiles, a real unguarded smile that reaches his eyes and transforms his entire face. It's the smile I remember from when we were boys, before the world got complicated, before he left. It's the smile I thought I'd never see again. Something inside me gives way. I take the glass from his hand and set it on the nearest cask, before one of us drops it. Then I catch him by the front of that ridiculous cashmere jumper and pull him against me. His laugh lands warm against my mouth. "Careful, this is Italian. It's got sheep muck on the hem. That does not make it less Italian." I kiss him before he can say anything else. He tastes of the whiskey, honey and apple, heather and smoke, but beneath it is Ewan, the familiar warmth of him, the sharp little breath he takes when my hand settles at the back of his neck, the way all that restless energy goes quiet when he lets himself be held. 6 months ago I thought loving him would mean losing him, that he was all motion and bright city lights, and I was a fixed point he would pass on his way to somewhere better. I know differently now. He still moves. Of course he does. Ewan could turn standing still into a performance. But he moves toward things now, toward the distillery, toward the Glen, toward me. A pointed cough sounds from behind a stack of casks. Ewan jerks back. I don't. I keep one arm around his waist and look over his shoulder. Elsie sits in an old wooden chair with her knitting pooled in her lap, and an expression of innocence that wouldn't fool a blind bairn. I hadn't heard her come in. That should worry me more than it does. "Don't stop on my account," she says. "I'm only checking the tension." Ewan's face goes scarlet. "In your knitting?" Her needles click. I feel his shoulders shake under my hand. He tries to swallow the laugh and fails. The sound fills the warehouse, bright and easy, and Elsie's smug wee smile deepens. "Theo's coming for dinner at 7, she says. She says if you two are late again, she's giving your pudding to Hamish." "Hamish is a dog," Ewan says. "A punctual dog." Elsie returns to her knitting, which is apparently our dismissal. Ewan leans into me, still laughing. "We've been managed." "Aye. Do you think she planned all of this?" He waves one hand between us, the warehouse and the single cask. The fake romance, the festival, me staying, you committing crimes against Scotch whiskey regulations. She didn't plan the whiskey. That is not the reassuring distinction you think it is. I look at Elsie. She doesn't glance up, but one needle pauses in midair. "She planned enough," I say. Ewan follows my gaze. His expression softens. "The distillery used to feel like a burden I carried for everyone who came before me. My father, his father, Elsie and all the Foxes and MacLeods who poured their lives into copper and oak. Now the place is noisy again. Orders stacked in the office, new hands in the yard, Ewan's muddy boots beside mine at the gatehouse door every night. There are 2 bedrooms in that house. We use one. The other has become an office, though Ewan calls it a strategy suite because he enjoys making simple things sound expensive. His Glasgow flat is gone. Half his clothes have colonized my wardrobe, and 3 kinds of moisturizer have appeared beside the bathroom sink. I complain about all of it, not very convincingly. He reaches for the tasting glass again. This needs a name. It needs another 18 months in the cask. It can do both. Multitasking is one of the miracles of modern business. You're no calling it Highland heresy. His mouth falls open. That is excellent. Write that down. No. The sinner's dram? Absolutely not. Pete expectations. I stare at him. He tries to hold my gaze. He lasts 3 seconds before dissolving into laughter again. That one was for me, he admits. Aye, it certainly wasn't for the whiskey. He sobers slowly, turning the glass between his fingers.
The pale gold spirit catches the dusty light. Whatever we call it, we bottle it properly. Numbered release, one task, no pretending it's anything other than an experiment. Our experiment. His eyes lift to mine. There it is again, that current. Quieter now, deeper, the kind that doesn't pull you out to sea but carries you exactly where you're meant to go. Ours, he agrees. He takes one last sip, lets it settle, and closes his eyes. For a moment, the warehouse is still around us. Rain taps against the high windows. Oak breathes out its slow angel's share. Elsie's needles click together, steady as a clock. Ewan opens his eyes. They're bright in the dimness. It's perfect, he says. Aye, it is. I pull him closer, the scent of sandalwood and peat smoke finally mingling into one perfect signature note. Home.
You have been listening to Kilt Trip by Riley Fox. End of audiobook. Thank you for listening to Kilt Trip by Riley Fox. If you enjoyed the story, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more full-length audiobooks and romantic comedies. Your support helps more readers find Riley Fox.